o'clock right now. So I'll do a roll call vote, starting with Councilmember Aldama.
Present.
Councilmember Clark. Councilmember Hugh.
Here.
Councilmember Tomachoff. Here. Councilmember Turner.
Aye.
Vice Mayor. I'm present. I know Councilmember Clark's supposed to be working her way in here right now. If you would, Bauer, when she comes in, if you would make note of that, I would appreciate it. So with that, Ms. Bauer, would you go ahead and introduce item number 1 for us, please?
Fiscal year 2020-21 budget workshop.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. I want to welcome you again to another budget workshop. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to our Budget and Finance Director, Lisette Camacho.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Today is our 4th meeting on the draft CIP. We had 3 meetings prior to today. We had a GEO bond project prioritization on February. We had the second one the first one was in February 4th, and the second one was on February 18th. And then the last draft CIP was on March 17th. Today, we'll be going over follow-up items from the May 5th budget workshop, and today we'll also go over the draft CIP. With that, I'll be turning over the next 2 slides to Ms. Rios.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is the item that was added last time we were together at the budget workshop, the additional funding for after-school programs. It's about $247,000 in ongoing funding and about $95,000 in one-time, as you can see there. And also in association with that, you see the addition of an FTE. So that's an FTE that was not here last time, but it was added as part of that after-school program. It's a recreation programmer to oversee all of those various sites. And the ongoing funding there is for this FTE, and then the rest of it is mainly for part-time staffing that this recreation coordinator would work with to run those programs. In addition, there are 2 other changes to FTEs that are being recommended since the last time we met. The first one is to reclass a position in, again, this is also in public facilities, recreation, and special events. They have a marketing and communications program manager. We would like to reclassify that to a CIP project manager. Over the next several years, as you know, and you'll see again today with the CIP, there are a lot of projects in parks, and so we would like to have a CIP project manager in parks to get those projects rolling, make sure that they're designed, the parks are designed properly, and the things that are going in the parks are well thought out, and all of those kinds of things, and work with engineering to actually help and procure architects, designers, and that type of things for the parks. And we can do that by reclassifying that position. It eliminates the other position. Those duties would then be absorbed by our marketing and communications team under Brent Stoddard, and then the other functions that are not related to marketing and communications can be absorbed within the rest of the parks staff.
All right, Ms. Rios, before you go on, I need to step back 1 page. The after-school programming, what we talked about at our last meeting, I actually had breakfast Saturday morning with Len Munzel, which is the gentleman that runs Arizona Christian University, and talked with him about our discussions at our meeting, and he was incredibly excited about the opportunity for them to work with the city of Glendale. It gives them opportunities to working with their students, and told him that we weren't looking for temporary. We were looking for something that we could be certain that it would be a curriculum and scheduled, and so they're more than eager to meet with the city, so that's very exciting for me. So one of the things that I'd asked one of the city members is, when we set this up and we're actually looking for the opportunity for people to make that offer if they want to participate, that we at least set up in that we take Glendale universities or Glendale locations first before we go outside of our city for those opportunities. I think that's fair, trying to keep it more in the city of Glendale. So anyway, I just want to bring that up, let the council know that Arizona Christian University is very, very excited about the opportunity. No promises made other than just told them what we were talking about, and they would like that opportunity to get involved. So with that, Councilmember Tomashoff actually had a question.
I did. So with the parks, could you go, is there a cost? You're taking an existing position and then basically changing its responsibilities, is that? Because I know we had talked before about bringing in somebody else outside to help manage this, because I do have some concerns about Parks' ability to actually implement and see through the CIP. The Parks Master Plan is almost 2 years late. So I thought we had talked before about bringing in an outside contractor to sort of oversee the CIP and the projects with the park to manage them. And then when they're finished, we don't have an employee that we have to find something for that person to do also.
Mayor, members of the council, this is an FTE. There is a minimal, well, it depends on how your view of it is, but there's about a difference in cost that's shown there of $9,973. So we don't actually add an FTE, we're just converting the function away from this FTE. It'll be a reduction in force by that one FTE, and then an addition of a different FTE to do the CIP project management. We do believe that there'll be ongoing work for this person, but of course, you know, in the future, 10 years out, if things change, we can always make an adjustment to that. But for at least the next 5 to 10 years, based on what we have in the CIP, we do think that it's wise to have a person in-house to coordinate those projects, and that we'll see a better outcome in terms of getting those park projects finished if we have our own FTE doing that work.
Do we know what the difference in cost would be to bring in a contractor as opposed to having a person?
Mayor, members of council, I do not. Typically, though, contractors are more expensive, but I don't have a quote for that.
I just have a level of concern because we keep hearing that they don't have enough people to manage what we're already trying to do. I don't know. I just have a lot of concerns about them actually being able to get through a CIP without having some sort of outside person come in and who's experienced in managing so many large-scale projects all at the same time.
Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tomashoff, again, our thought would be we would have it, and it doesn't mean that we may not, depending on the schedule for our CIP improvements for the parks, that we still may not bring in outside support people to deliver projects. But we need somebody internally to, you know, to kind of coordinate all that. And from my experience, you know, in the level of activity that's in our current 10-year CIP for parks, it makes sense to have somebody that really is focused on making sure that that we take the policy direction provided by the council and that we have a thoughtful plan laid out. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to still have to ramp up additional support, which could be, as you indicated, could be you know, using outside contractors to help do project delivery. But we clearly need somebody in. When you look at the amount of assets that the park department has within its inventory, that we need to have somebody really focused on the capital improvement side of it on an ongoing basis, and that's certainly our recommendation.
Okay, so are we bringing in, Mayor, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to go through the chair. Are we bringing, so you're reclassifying an existing employee, or are we going to hire somebody for this?
Mayor, members of the council, the position that we're reclassing isn't the same or even similar to the duties of the marketing and communications manager. So the marketing and communications program manager would be considered as a reduction in force, and that position would go away essentially, and then we would use that position to reclass to a completely different set of duties. So it will not be an existing person who is being reclassified in their duties. It would be a person who is basically reduced by that position and a completely different position that we would hire for.
Okay, so we would do a recruitment for somebody with experience that would be able to Okay, I misunderstood. I thought we were going to just reclassify an existing employee and give them different responsibilities.
No, this would be a completely different recruitment for a different type of position.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Along those same lines, are the positions that we're considering, the one that the marketing and communications and the project manager, is this in parks, or are they in different departments, and we'll be removing an employee in one department and adding an employee in another?
Mayor, members of the council, this position is in Public Facilities, Parks and Recreation, and the new position would be there in Parks and Recreation as well. It would report to Parks.
Okay. And I guess it's a little premature, but I would just say now that when staff looks to draw up the skill set for that new position, if it's approved by the council, I would like to think that we would look for somebody that has at least some background in history and historic preservation and that sort of thing, because that's a significant part of our parks program and the capital work that we'll be doing.
Bill Dahman.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is outside of this conversation, is more of your recommendation. As I said before on the after-school recreational programs, I think it's just a great idea to have partners. However, I don't agree that we do a partnership with just these. So as I said before, the partnership with this organization you mentioned, Mayor, should be abroad to all of them, Foothills included. Because we may implement, if this passes, the new programs at these centers. We're going to look out into some partners with some individuals who can help. That should also be at all the centers, not just centers on this side of town. With over $500,000 of part-time staff at Foothills, that's where we need to be partnering. So all I'm saying is across the board, if we're going to partner with people, that's a great organization, but I think it needs to be across the board, not just one center or two centers. So that's all I'm asking. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, and then the next position is as a result of the work that Jean Moreno, our interim community services director, has been doing with the libraries, and it's a request to reclassify this is a vacant position. It's currently a lead library assistant, and we would like to reclassify that to a volunteer coordinator. And the idea here would be, right now we have, I think, 9 different people across all of the library branches looking for and getting volunteers for the library. And what we would like to do is coordinate and consolidate those functions under one person who can look for volunteers for all of the libraries, make those connections to the community, and recruit and obtain volunteers for all of the library branches. That allows us, by putting those under one person, to have the other 8 people who are currently sort of part-time doing that go back to resuming their library assistant functions. And we think it's a more efficient way to operate the library volunteer program. Again, there is some cost associated with it. You see it there. But Ms. Moreno believes, and I think that she's right, that by doing that and getting more library volunteers, we can actually reduce the cost of some of our temporary staff. So as we put it in place, we should see some reduction in the number of temporary workers that we need as they're being replaced by volunteers. So overall, it should save us money, but there's a slight cost at the beginning to get that program rolling.
Mayor? Which lead library assistant is being considered to being reclassed? Is it at one location?
Mayor, members of the council, I don't know that answer. There are lead library assistants in the system in various ones. This happens to be a vacant position.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It's a vacant, okay, thank you. We're done. Thank you, Mayor.
And so with that, this is a new summary of all of those personnel changes. There's really only one, the new addition for the public facilities, parks, recreation, and special events, 1 FTE. The last time we showed you that, we had a total of 13 FTEs coming in, and this just updates it to show the 14th or the additional FTE. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisette.
The next slide is the updated fiscal year 2021 budget for the general fund. The beginning fund balance is approximately 44 million, operating revenues of 234 million, one-time revenues of 6.5 million, with total revenues of about 240 million. Operating expenditures is 225 million, net transfers of 14.7 million, and contingency of 2 million, with a total surplus or deficit of almost $1.2 million. It is significant that even with the current economic situation that we're in, we're only drawing down fund balance by about 1.2 million. If we spend our contingency, our fund balance would be about 43 million at the end of fiscal year 2021. If we don't spend our contingency, we would be putting back about 1 million into our fund balance, increasing from 44 million to 45 million at the end of fiscal year 2021. Looks like we're missing a slide and we don't have the updated presentation in here. The next slide should have been the operating budget by department. Oh, there it is.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt Ms. Camacho. Let's go back to the previous slide. We did have another change in the operating budget that we wanted to talk to you about. It didn't impact the general fund, but transportation was able to pull out 2 of their supplemental requests they had asked for. And the reason they were able to do that is they received a grant in association with the CARES Act that is passed through to them from the city of Phoenix. It will be shown as a reduction of the amount Phoenix is charging us for these and other services, and so they will not need these 2 supplementals, and in fact, they will have additional savings. It was about a $1.2 million grant. And then we're able to show you, this is the slide that we added. Now I'm going to go back to you.
Mayor, I have a question on the previous slide that Ms. Rios just explained.
Yes, thank you.
You want to, I might have been distracted, but we're having grants that will cover these costs, but there will not be any reduction in service.
No, Mayor, members of the council, no reduction in service, and actually a grant for $1.2 million that will cover this and other costs.
Thank you.
Okay, now on the operating budget by departments. The total operating budget for fiscal year 2021 is 443.8 million. The largest component for general fund is police and fire. Police at 105.1 million and fire at 53.7 million. The other largest components of the operating budget are water and wastewater at 55.2 million, field operations at 46.6 million, human resources and risk management at 44.2 million, transportation at 30.7 million, and community services at 30.2 million. At this point, we are opening it up for council questions and discussions, and we are looking for a consensus from council on the operating budget.
Questions? Consensus? Yes. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? So on the slide, I think it's still slide 7, where it just shows the general fund budget basically breakdown. So are you looking for consensus whether or not to spend the contingency? Or I'm not exactly sure what's meant by that slide on.
Mayor, members of the council, with this slide, it does assume that, and with a total operating budget of the 443.8 million, it does assume that the contingency would be spent. We use contingency when there is an emergency. So during the year, it may come up to where there's an emergency in one of our general fund departments, and there's a need for the use of contingency. There may not be a need to use the contingency, and at that time, the balance in the contingency would be put into fund balance. In order to use the contingency, it is an action that council approves, so it does go back to council for approval before the contingency is transferred into a department or a program that needs to use that.
So Mayor, if I could, how much did we allocate for contingency last year? Was it 3 million?
Mayor, members of the council, it was about 1.8 million.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let me ask you one question, real quick. With what's going on right now, the COVID-19, there's monies that we've been spending that we're expecting to be repaid, hopefully. Do we have any idea how much money so far that the city's expended that hopefully we can be reimbursed, that potentially could come back into our general funds? Maybe wouldn't have to use the contingency.
Mayor, members of the council, we are tracking the salaries and overtime expense and also any supplies, equipment that we purchased because of COVID-19. I don't have that number in front of me, but I could certainly email it to the council after this meeting.
I think everybody would like to have that, at least a rough idea of what we hope to get reimbursed.
Mayor, members of the council, will do that.
All right, thank you. So at this point, we have consensus? Okay, there you go.
With that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Lindsay.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. I will be going through the draft CIP portion of the presentation. The first slide is a slide that we typically show when we go through the draft capital improvement program that just kind of describes what the plan is. The capital improvement plan includes assets valued at over $50,000, and they have a useful life of 5 years or more. They typically include street improvements, water treatment plants, large equipment, land, and buildings. We have a 10-year capital improvement program here in Glendale, but only the first year is adopted as part of the annual budget, so the fiscal year 2021 is what's being adopted as part of the draft CIP. And the projects that are in the first 5 years have identified funding sources. One of our financial policies is that we will first improve existing assets, second, replace existing assets as needed, and then third, construct new assets.
Vice Mayor?
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Melner. I'd like to at least throw an idea out there that I have for an additional financial policy when it comes to CIP, that if a project exceeds its contingency, that it would need to come back to council for an explanation as to why it's exceeded its contingency and where the additional money would be coming from. I understand we've had the discussion about the city manager's authority to transfer money, but we've had a couple projects recently that were way over what was originally in the CIP, and I think it'll accomplish a couple of different things. I think it will also make sure or ensure that we have a better idea that these numbers that are in the CIP are realistic, and that if we start getting way over and above the CIP amount in excess of what the contingency amount is, that it would come back to a workshop. We would understand what's happened and why it's exceeding the amount that was in the CIP and where the proposed money is going to be transferred in from to complete the project.
Vice Mayor?
Go ahead, Councilmember Turner.
I could support that and would like to see it come forward for adoption at a future date.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead,
Sorry,
Councilmember.
Councilmember. I too can support that. I think what you're saying is prior to a contingency amount that's over the city manager's threshold to approve must come to us.
Vice Mayor, can I answer
Go
that?
ahead,
Thank you.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
So what I'm saying is, like, for example, if a project is a $10 million project, it probably has about $1 million of contingency. So if it exceeds $11 million, if they've exhausted the $10 million in the CIP and the contingency, and there's, there are legitimate reasons why the project is costing more, but come back, give us an explanation as to what has happened, why it's costing more, and then where the money would be transferred from to finish and complete the project.
Mayor, thank you, Councilman. Mayor, if I may continue, also let me add, what is the current threshold for approving change orders? What's the dollar amount that that the city manager can approve a change order without the city's or the council's authority.
Mayor, members of the council, we don't per se have a dollar amount that the city manager can approve in change orders. What we have, sort of described by Councilmember Tomaltroff, is an overall project budget. And as long as that project budget is not exceeded by any change order, then a change order can occur because we had that budget for the project. I think what Councilmember Tomaltroff may be referring to is cases where one project, and we'll just take a streets project, for example, may go a little bit over budget, including what it had in contingency, I think is what she's describing. And there may be another project with savings, and there are cases where, because they were both street projects, we will transfer funding, say 200,000 from one street project to another one because they were both within streets. And there is no particular dollar limit on that either. If it's over $50,000, it has to come through the city manager. If it's under 50,000, I believe that's part of the transfer policy, and a department director can approve a transfer that is within the same fund, same department, under 50,000.
Mayor, if I may, so the policy request from council member is appropriate, and I could support that.
Mayor, a question for Councilmember Tomachoff. Are you seeking council approval for overrides on contingency expenditures, or are you seeking just to be informed of the override that is occurring?
I'm just seeking to be informed. That's why I said workshop, just so we would have an explanation as to what, a good example is Ballpark Boulevard. By the time we understood the complexity of what was happening with Ballpark Boulevard, we were probably double what was originally in the CIP, just so that we understand, and then where the money's being, literally a project. Another one example is boring under the 101 freeway with the water. That was a lot more, I think, than what we originally anticipated. I think it was somewhere around maybe 3 times what we thought. But just so that we are told, look, this project, we've run into whatever it is we've run into, and that we've exceeded the contingency, we want to continue the project. Here's what happened. You're going to be seeing contracts for excess of what was in the CIP. Here's why. And not to bring it back to, well, we would obviously have to vote on the contracts, but not on continuing the project. Just come back with us with an explanation, and then where the money's coming from. Is it savings? Is it, some of the project might be being delayed, something like that, but not to, just to as information.
Mayor, members of the council, yes, we can certainly work on that. If you recall, we made another change because specifically of concerns about Ballpark Boulevard, is that as we bring items back that the council will be approving different contracts, we'll have an element in the staff report that shows whether we're still continuing to track to the original budget. I think that was something that Councilmember Tomachoff had asked for when we had a prior discussion of this, and so we would be doing that. So that's another layer of notification to the council, so that even though you're approving maybe 8 or 9 contracts, you need to know when you add up those 8 or 9 contracts, how does that then relate in the aggregate to the overall project? And so we'll be making sure we call that out going forward as well.
Mayor, if I could, and I appreciate that, and I know that that's happened, but it doesn't offer an overall explanation as to exactly what the issues are. It's kind of a one piece at a time way to find out. That's why I thought it would be, and it's more transparent to the public also, that we are, we propose this project in our CIP, which is, we tell the public this is what we're doing and this is how much we're spending. If we exceed that in contingency, we come back, and it's for the sake of transparency and informing the council as well, as to we've run into a problem, or, cost of labor, cost of materials, whatever it is, has increased the cost of this project in excess of its contingency. So just for information, that I'm not saying we need to come back and vote on the project again, just for information for us and transparency for whose money this is. This is the public's money. That what has happened, what's transpired, and where we're getting the rest of the money to finish the project.
Mayor, members of council, again, I wasn't saying in exception to the policy change. I'm saying that it's an additive element. So we'll, as you guys are approving elements within the budget, we'll make sure we keep tracking that to the CIP. And then obviously, whenever we get to a point to where we've exceeded the project total and the contingency, we'll come back and have a discussion with the council and be able to give you an explanation.
Thank you.
The next slide just describes what you have in the binders that were provided last week. The first item is the change report, which is behind the second tab in your binder. This is the change between the current adopted CIP, so the fiscal year 1920 CIP, and in comparison to the fiscal year 2021 draft CIP. The second item is a CIP summary report by project type. This report includes all 10 years of the capital improvement program. Third item is the CIP summary report by funding source. This report also includes all 10 years of the CIP. The fourth item is the project list by project type, and that is actually behind each one of the individual tabs for each program. The fifth item is the project list by type and by funding source. And then the sixth item that are behind each one of the tabs for each program is the project detail of each project that's within that program. The draft CIP that you have before you does include carryover. The report includes each program by project type and by funding source. Also includes the change document that shows the changes between the current year and the draft CIP. That particular report does not include carryover. And then later in the presentation, we have some slides that show differences in projects from between when you saw them originally on March 17th and where they sit currently within the current draft CIP. The next slide describes some of the funding sources that are within the capital improvement program. It's basically, your legend for funding sources with regards to the CIP. The first item is pay-as-you-go funds, which are funds 1080 and 2110, the general government capital projects, which are general funded, and then the Arts Commission. Examples of 1080 projects are on pages 54 and 55 of your binder. The Building Maintenance Reserve and the Camelback Ranch Maintenance Reserve are both examples of pay-as-you-go general funded projects. The Arts Commission has one project in the capital improvement program, and that is on page 25. There are several bond funding sources within the CIP. 4010 is streets construction, and an example of a streets project would be on page 147 of your binder. 4040 is public safety construction. There's an example of a public safety construction project on page 126. 4050 is parks construction. There's an example on page 101, which is the O'Neill Park splash pad construction. 4060 is government facilities, and there are examples of those projects on pages 38 and page 40. Cultural facility construction has a project on page 103. Open space and trail construction has a project on page 104, both in the parks programs. The library construction program is exclusively funded by bonds, and it begins on page 79 of your book. And the flood control construction, the drainage program starts on page 27, and that's primarily where the flood control construction bond projects exist. Development impact fees are also a funding source within the capital improvement program. Examples of where DIF-funded projects are in your book are Fund 4240, which is citywide parks. There's an example of a citywide park project on page 105 in the parks program of your binder. Open space 4290 is on page 104. 4320. Diff Parks and Recreation Zone 1 East. There's an example of a project on page 106. 4330, which is Parks and Rec Zone 2, west of the 101, is on page 92. 4010 and 4420 streets projects are both in the streets program. And the next two funding sources, Streets Construction and Transportation Sales Tax funds 4020 and 4030 all exist within the streets program.
Mayor, for purposes of perhaps explaining DIF a little bit more to the general public, we all know what they mean, but I'm not sure the public does, or they may just need a refresher. But when you talk about DIF, explain the difference between citywide DIF and zone DIF. Thank you.
Mayor, members of the council, we have different development impact fee funding across the city. It depends on when the legislation was approved. So we have old DIF, old development impact fee, and we have development impact fees that are zones, and that is within the second legislation that was passed. So, and then the most recent development impact fee study that we only have 2 zones. So for example, the zones represent different areas within the city versus the citywide would be a DIF that could be used for citywide purposes.
Oh, no, wait, let's go back a little bit. Development impact fees. Explain to the people what they are.
Mayor, members of the council, development impact fees are fees that are assessed for development for their share of the cost of the development.
Okay.
For future growth.
Okay. So every time a new project is built, there will be DIF fees associated with it that go into this pot of money, correct?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, that is correct.
Okay. You referenced old DIF. What is old DIF?
Mayor, members of the council, the old development impact fee was prior to Senate Bill 1525. So there were several legislation that that guided, or policies and procedures that guided the development impact fee. So the old development impact fee did not require an IIP or an improvement plan. So those are subject to the old development impact fee.
Now, did the new DIF program make the allocation of DIF resources more stringent than the old plan did?
Mayor, members of the council, it required that a specific project or an improvement plan was adopted by the city, and those improvements or within the improvement plan could be reimbursed by the development impact fee assessed and collected by the city.
Okay. Now we talk about zones. Can you describe the geographical boundaries of the zones that exist in Glendale?
Mayor, members of the council, I don't have the specific zones in front of me. There is zone 1, 2, and 3 for the second DIF, and then now we have 2 zones for the newest DIF approved by council. We have zone 1 and zone 2, and I don't have the exact boundaries of what they are, but we can certainly provide that to the council.
Well, would I be fairly correct in assuming that Zone 1 is everything east of the Loop 101?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, they're identified as Zone 1, East 101, and Zone 2, West 101, because they are generally east of the 101 and west of the 101, those 2 zones. It's also important to note maybe that that DIF, I think the important thing is it can only be used on new projects that are growth related. It can't be used for maintenance of facilities that already exist or for facilities that are not related to growth. So that's the defining feature of DIF. And when it is in zones as opposed to citywide, it can only be spent on projects within that zone. Those are probably the 2 key things that we have to keep in mind as we look at the capital improvement plan.
Does the new DIF program require any physical proximity to the construction project that is contributing to the diff. And I'll try to frame it this way. We do a project, say, on 83rd Avenue, but we use that Zone 1 diff, which is basically citywide, the existing city, everything east of Loop 101. Can we then use that diff money for a project up on Union Hills? A new project up on Union Hills? Is there any requirement that, since it applies to new growth, that it be in proximity to the project that is being built? Did you understand what I?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I'm not 100% sure I understood,
Okay.
but
I
yes,
build a
it does
project.
have to be,
Yeah.
there is a provision that it has to serve those who paid it, essentially. Maybe Mr. Bailey wants to be more specific. I'm not an attorney, but
I
he may be able
actually
to
think
answer.
Mr. Stoddard, he was working with legislators at the time that happened. I think he could probably give the best definition if he's been listening to the conversation. I do remember in the legislature that a lot of the the home builders were complaining that cities were charging diff fees and then they weren't using the money for that project. They were going clear somewhere else. And I think, Mr. Sutter, if you could address that.
Before Mr. Stoddard weighs in, I would like to again say there are different diff legislations that happen at different times. And so depending on which fund, and that's why we have so many of these funds, the rules are slightly different for each fund because they were created under a different set of legislation. So it does become quite complex when you look at that. And so our overall strategy is to spend the oldest funds first and then spend the newer funds, down the line so that we're all on the same legislation instead of trying to constantly get back and forth between these funds and what were the rules under that fund. So, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Stoddard.
Yeah, so Mayor, members of the council, Vicky's correct. If you remember, it wasn't a single piece of legislation. It was a series of legislations over the year, over about a series of 3 to 4 years. During that time, cities had been collecting development impact fees, and the compromise at the end of the day with the final piece of legislation, and Governor Brewer at the time kind of putting a 5-year moratorium on any new impact fee legislation, the compromise with the cities was that we would be able to take the revenue that we had been collecting under the old system, and there was a lot more flexibility to how cities would use those funds. And anything after a certain period of time then was held to these new standards, and there was a couple of different series of rules for each of those monies. So as Vicki kind of explained it, it's in the city's best interest per that law, and that's what we negotiated, was to allow us to spend these older funds in different ways with the flexibility, and then once those are kind of out of our system, out of our accounts, then our hands are tied very tightly in how we can kind of utilize this development impact fee money to build facilities which are limited in size for parks and libraries, how we can use it for infrastructure, the timeline of how long you can collect it before you have to spend it. So there is a complex set of rules for each different piece of infrastructure. A wastewater project, for instance, there's a certain period of time where you have to actually build the infrastructure before that money then says, oh, you didn't build it? Okay, it has to go back. So it's not really a one size or a one rule fits all for each individual project. It is a very complex, multiple page piece of state statute. So.
Mayor, if I could follow up. But that doesn't speak to the issue of proximity, which is where I was going.
Mayor,
Could you speak to that, please?
I'll take that. I mean, I'm sorry. Mayor and council, a development impact fee is an exaction. So there must be a relationship between the fee and then what is being paid for. So to your question, Councilmember Clark, is yes, there must be a connection. That's one reason why you've taken it from some of the fees being citywide. So for example, a wastewater treatment plant, everybody citywide would benefit from that versus something that's more localized within a zone. and therefore it's only applied within the zone, but the benefit of the improvement, the infrastructure, would be in that zone. So it would be dependent upon the fee, but to the extent in your hypothetical, if there was excess funds in Zone 1, you could not take those and use those in Zone 3.
Very good. That's what I was trying to get at. That, one other thing to share with the public. DIF only applies to certain categories. For parks is one. What kinds of construction can be done using DIF monies? Streets, obviously. Water projects, citywide. What else could be covered by DIF fees?
Mayor, members of the council, that's actually a very complicated question, and I think it could be a whole workshop in and of itself. But again, it has to be growth related. So you could build a new park, for example, using DIF fees, but within the legislation, there are also restrictions as to what can be in the park, what can be the size of the park, various things like that. So it's very complicated, but it has to be something that is related to growth. That's why it's something new and not the maintenance of something that was there. Now, having said that, you could add a new feature to an existing park if you're expanding it because it's growing or something like that. It's just that you cannot use the DIF fees if they don't benefit or are unrelated to growth. And so that's kind of the underlying philosophy of them. Getting into what specifically can be done becomes quite complex.
Let me add to what Councilmember Clark's asking. So in Yucca District, which is growing tremendously quick, if we decided that we wanted to build a fire station, can DIF fees be used for that in that area if there's no fire station in the area that would take care of the businesses and the homes?
Mayor and council, to the extent that it is growth related, then yes, that would be a qualifying expenditure. But that's a real simple example. They get more complicated when we start to get into greater detail. I think another, just as an example, to kind of piggyback with what Vicki had said, is that let's use a park, for example. If you are putting in a new improvement because the old improvement is old and dilapidated, that's probably not qualifying under development impact fees. But if you're finding that the slide is being heavily used because now in the area you not only have 200 homes, but you now have 700 homes, and that you'll need new playground equipment to support the use, then yes, that would be a qualifying expenditure.
Thank you.
Mayor, one final comment. This is a very complicated issue, and the legislature keeps changing the rules on cities about this. I think that this is a valid topic for a future workshop and would ask staff to consider that. Thank you.
The other two funding sources that are listed on this particular page are special revenue funds, the first of which is the HERF and Street Construction Fund, and the second is the Transportation Sales Tax Fund. Both of those programs are within primarily the streets program, and there are examples of those projects on pages 144 and 145 of your binder. Lastly, we have enterprise user fees, which are the enterprise funds within the capital improvement program. Water and sewer are primarily the bulk of the capital improvement program. They have examples of projects on pages 177 and page 199. Those are where they start within your binder. The landfill program, Fund 6110, begins on page 57. And the solid waste program begins on page 131. Grants are also a component of the capital improvement program. Transportation grants, or Fund 2060, have examples on page 173 in the streets program. Other grants, Fund 2160, are in the drainage program on pages 32 and 33. And airport capital grants are within the airport program, which is the first tab in your binder, and they are on page 7.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. Since we're talking about funds, and you've listed all the different funds, I found one project that was, to me, highly unusual. I don't think I'd ever seen quite the funding sources that you normally see. The fleet air compressor gets funds from $120,000 from Fund 1080, General Government, $12,000 from Fund 420, HERF, which I'm not sure that, I thought HERF was for streets. $18,000 from Fund 430 from transportation, $22,000 from Fund 620 water, $7,000 from Fund 630 sewer, $17,000 from Fund 6110 landfill, and $127,000 from Fund 6120 solid waste. Could you talk about that a little bit and explain the necessity of apportioning? Is this one fleet air compressor? Is it a fleet of fleet air compressors? Could you explain this project with a little bit more detail and why 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different funding sources are being?
Mayor, members of the council, it is one compressor in the fleet building, and the various different funding sources are a reflection of all of the different city users of the fleet building. So if you take a look at all of those various funds, such as solid waste, water, those are funds that all use that one building and all benefit from the replacement of the compressor in that building.
Thank you.
Mayor and council, and for the benefit of the public, the project that Councilmember Clark was referring to is on page 53 of your binder, if anyone wanted to take a look at it. And with that, we'll move on to the slide that shows the 10-year capital improvement program. Again, the city of Glendale has a 10-year capital improvement program. Years 1 through 5 have identified funding sources. Years 6 through 10 we commonly refer to as the out years, because those years do not have identified funding sources. And as part of the fiscal year 2021 budget, we will be only adopting and appropriating the first year of the program. The total 10-year CIP is about just shy or just over $1.2 billion. Water and wastewater make up about 38% of the total program with $465.4 million. Followed closely by streets with $165 million. Facilities projects are just shy of $170 million. Parks projects, 121.9 or almost $122 million. And public safety projects at $138.1.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't see in here, may have missed it, but whatever happened to the proposal or request to remodel, renovate, update, upgrade the public works facilities out west of here next to Spring City? Whatever happened to that?
Mayor, members of council, if you'll give us a minute, we'll find the page for you for that.
And if you'll just tell us what part of that is in the budget, is it the whole thing or is it parts of the project?
When we find it, we'll show you what page it's on and show you how it's funded,
you.
if you'll give us a minute.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, the Glendale Operations Campus project is on page 38 of your binder. And for fiscal year 21, there is $200,000 in the budget that is being paid for by the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund.
I haven't gotten to that page, but that's all we're approving for that whole. whole facility, that whole area?
Mayor, members of the council, again, when your policy is to adopt a 10-year CIP, so technically the entire project is in there. It's $27.2 million in total, but the only portion of it we're appropriating now is the first year, which is the $200,000. That will be, typically that's like a design phase where we take $200,000, we start designing. That helps the department and the city refine what's it going to look like and what the actual cost will be. Right now, it's a very high level estimate. It's another example of a project that is funded by multiple funding sources because that will benefit the water and wastewater utilities and transportation and in part the general government. So public safety and so it's been split in funding between all of those that it benefits.
Mayor, so thank you for that, and duly noted, there's a process for that. I just was hoping that it didn't just get lost. So there's a design phase, and staff is working on that. Glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I remember this has been in front of us a couple of times, and I thought the last conversation we had, I remember they brought it back for, I think, an additional $10,000 for design and assessment. And then there was a discussion about whether or not the police evidence storage and all of that was going to be part of this. And then I don't remember it ever coming back to us after that. So I'm not, unless I just don't remember, but that's the last thing I remember having discussion. Joyce is shaking her head.
Yeah.
That's the last discussion I remember having about this, and then we never saw it again, and apparently it's off and running, so I'm not sure.
Why don't we let Ms. Watanko give an
Okay.
explanation?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Councilmembers Tomashoff and Councilmember Clark are correct. The last we left this project is we have to finalize work on the adjacent property that the city owns, the Lazy J Trailer Park, to determine the future of that, and then we're going to come back to council with that planning process. And we've been delayed a couple months due to the COVID situation, but that is still the plan. So all we have forecast next year is $200,000 if we choose to move into the design. But we are going to come back to council when we finalize that report on Lazy J to get direction, and then the master plan for the Field Ops Campus or the Glendale Operations Campus.
Mayor? Follow-up question to that. I thought council direction was before you go to all the expense of designing the campus, we had one discussion where we had seen the general layout and concepts for that campus, and I think at that time council asked that when you came closer to knowing what exactly you wanted, not final design, but a more refined conceptual, that would be brought back to council. Will that be the case?
Mayor and council, you're correct. That will be brought back to council.
Before we go to the expense of doing the final design, correct?
Mayor and council, you are correct. We will be coming back in a planning phase before we hit the design.
Thank you.
Yep, good enough. Thank you, Mayor.
The next slide is the first year, so fiscal year 2021 of the CIP by funding source. So this would be the first year of the program and the year that council is adopting as part of the fiscal year 2021 budget. The total CIP for fiscal year 2021 is approximately $175.3 million. Enterprise funds make up $104.2 million of that total. Bond and construction funds are approximately $25.1 million. Transportation sales tax, $21.1 million. HERF, $7.9 million. Grant funding, $7.3 million. Pay-as-you-go, $6.3 million, and then development impact fees at $3.4 million. The HERF and transportation sales tax projects that are in fiscal year 2021 are primarily using existing fund balance to pay for those projects. The next slide is also the first year of the CIP, so the fiscal year 2021 capital improvement program but this slide just has it broken down by project type instead of funding source. Again, the total fiscal year 2021 CIP is approximately 175.3 million. Water and wastewater make up 86.9 million of the program, which is just about 50% of the plan. Streets at 46.3 million, airport 5.6 million, arts 1.2 million, drainage about 900,000, facilities approximately 4 million, parks projects are 3.2 million, public safety projects at 8.7 million, and solid waste at 5.9 million.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what might be helpful is when you look at landfill, wastewater, water, they're all enterprise funds. And whatever bond indebtedness they have is usually paid by the ratepayers over time. And the issues that I think are of importance to the general public might more likely be airport, arts, drainage, facility maintenance, parks, that kind of thing. Those things that they can see, touch, and feel and have an impact on their lives. I think what might be helpful is to see and hear some kind of total of the non-enterprise funds, some kind of pie chart that shows non-enterprise funds, and also how much debt capacity we have to satisfy and how much debt capacity is left over after these projects are allocated. So it's too late now, but perhaps as a follow-up, you could provide council with that kind of information. I think that tying this to debt capacity makes a lot more sense, at least for me, because then I know, oh my God, we've used up all our debt capacity for the next 20 years. I'm being facetious, but you get where I'm going. So I am more interested in the things that are non-enterprise and how that affects our ability to either add or subtract from the CIP in future years dependent upon debt capacity. Thank you.
CIP highlights in the draft CIP that's before you today these are some of the projects that are within the CIP. The first is carryover to complete the design of the lake at Heroes Park of approximately $127,000. There's $194,000 in the plan for the pickleball courts at Foothills Park. There is $1.3 million for the construction of the splash pad at O'Neill Park. There is $7.7 million in the public safety building remodel project, and included within that project are improvements to the sign building, the court building, and other buildings or items that were identified in the public safety building assessment.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. If I could interrupt at that point, when the minute you say sign building, and I think prosecutors, I think we're going into year 2 now of trying to move the prosecutors from their trailers over to the sign building. What is taking so long to get this group moved from trailers into the sign building? I wish somebody would explain to me why this process has dragged on so long.
Mr. Phelps, would you like to address that?
Yeah, Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Clark, we're very close to getting completed on the remodel at the grip stick for moving our fire administration into there. It was a complex. There was a lot of moving elements to it. We couldn't begin work on the sign building while the fire administration was still using that facility. And so we'll be having an open house and a ribbon cutting that the council will be getting invited to. I will tell you, it's come out incredibly well. I think you'll be very impressed when you see that what we've done is we haven't done a stopgap measure for fire administration. We've really created a home for our fire administration that should be a home for many, many, many years to come. As soon as they move out, we've been already working with facilities on the programming needs of the prosecutor. We now have a really strong understanding of what they need in terms of storage, conference rooms, individual office spaces, support spaces. And as soon as they move out, again, this project, we intend to move forward in the upcoming capital year.
Mayor, can somebody give me some kind of end date when we can finally say we've moved the prosecutors out of those?
Yep. Mayor, members of the council, Councilman Clark, it is our intention that we would have the prosecutors moved in during the upcoming budget year.
Thank you.
Mayor. Going to be critical here, but pickleball courts for 194,000. Do we actually have like an increased influx of pickleball participants? One, two, is that a new court? Is that an existing court? And does it fall within the financial policy of A, improve existing assets, B, replace existing assets, or C, construct new assets? So first question is this a luxury or is it just a want?
Mayor? Mayor, it's me. Could I speak to that? Councilmember Aldama, that is leftover DIF money. That is, I believe, expiring DIF money, and the original plan was for a bike park. That, I'm not exactly sure. The plans got very sideways with the bike park, what they originally anticipated they were going to be able to do, and then once they actually got it on paper, it was going to be probably about this big. So there is a high demand, and a lot of pickleball users use the gym, the basketball courts at FRAC. There's actually kind of a lot of discussion, I guess. But there are, I would say, a large number of pickleball users. I actually get calls from residents about a pickleball court. But this is just transitioned from DIF money that's expiring, that is, I believe, that needs to be used in that area, if I'm not mistaken, that was going to be a bike park. And then once it got actually far enough down the road, it was realized that in order to do what a real bike park, this was not going to be anywhere near enough money, and has transitioned over to a pickleball court that's going to be at the park. So it's money literally that if we don't spend it in that area, we're not going to be able to spend it.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate that. Mayor, if I may continue. So then was the proposed bike park part of DIF, or was that outside of DIF money then, the bike park that failed?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tomelchoff is correct. It was DIF money that was programmed for a bike park, and it was not enough money to do a bike park. It is enough money. It was always DIF, so it would have been DIF for the bike park, and it's just been converted to using DIF that has to be used in that zone. It was DIF that was collected when there was a zone that included that area, and it is DIF that needs to be spent in that area, and it was DIF for the bike park, and now it's DIF for a pickleball.
Thank you for that, Mayor. If I may continue. So this is what I take my mask off on this one. This is where it gets real frustrating, and Councilmember Clark asked for some specific questions on some money to resurge our community centers, but yet we're getting, and it's not, Councilmember, it's not your fault. It's just, it's an unequal playing field when we talk about DIF monies. Just take the Ocotillo District, the Cactus District, probably never, if any, really very insignificant amounts of DIF. That's why we have this budget process that we need to start allocating dollars to those areas that don't get DIF money at all. And so I get what you're saying. Thank you for the explanation. It makes sense. But we really have to look at how we're going to offset areas of the community, areas of the city that won't ever see DIF dollars, and if they do, they're very insignificant, far few in between. I think we really need to take a look at that. But thank you for the explanation. I learned a little more that pickleball is important, so.
Mayor, thank
you.
you. Councilmember Waldema, so would you prefer just to see the money not be used at all? I'm not sure I understand, because it's DIF money that's been sitting around for years. It's never been used, and if it doesn't get used, it's no longer, I believe it has to be used this fiscal year, if I'm not mistaken. And the other thing is, I feel like this council has dedicated a lot of time and energy and resources specifically to your district. I'm a little disappointed to hear you say that you feel like we're not committed to the residents of Ocotillo, because I feel like, especially I'm speaking for myself, but actually for all of us, that we have dedicated a lot of time, energy, and resources to downtown business. There's no manager that manages a specific area of business except for downtown. So I'm just a little disappointed to hear you say that, because I feel like we've been very supportive of your residents. And your district also qualifies and has been a beneficiary of CDBG money that is not available in other parts of the city that have gone to, that's what we're using for O'Neill Park, I believe, some of it. It's helped Rose Lane Aquatic Center. So, I mean, I don't think it's productive, and I also don't think it's fair to feel that the council hasn't really had respect and appreciation and treated the city equitably as far as dedicating resources. I care just as much about downtown as I care about my district, and your residents just as much as I care about my residents. So, thank you.
Mayor, if I may. Councilmember, I didn't say that, I said if you would have heard what I said it makes sense to spend that money. Absolutely does. I didn't say take it away. I questioned whether or not it was general fund or just CIP outside of DIF, so I think it makes sense. But unfortunately, you haven't been, and this council hasn't been supportive of the Ocotillo district when we talk about the needs of its community. It's been, I don't know, 6, maybe 7 years now, and we're just now getting a splash pad or whatever it's going to be. 6 years, so no, we haven't been supportive. We're just now hoping to hopefully get it passed to start up these community centers, so no, we haven't been supportive. Yes, we have been supportive, and thank you very much for supporting the downtown businesses. I think that is huge. Thank you for that. That is well noted. But when we talk about the needs, absolutely not. So I think for you, we should really have a workshop on why we're spending $500,000 on part-time staff for a facility that serves one area of the city. Yes, it's available to everybody, but it's not used by everyone. So I think, Councilmember, while you are supportive, no, we haven't holistically done the things in not just the Ocotillo district. I'm talking about the Cactus district and other areas. But when you specify the Ocotillo district, no, we have not. I'm sorry, we have not. Absolutely have not. And that is false. Please bring me identify where we've been supportive in the needs that mirror, let's just take Foothills. Bring it to me. I'd like to see it.
Okay, can we move on, the rest of this, please?
The next slide, actually, the first project that's listed with 4.6 million is, it's a misprint. That is not the north cell liner at the landfill. That's actually the landfill phase construction north project, which is on page 70 of your binder. It's for the excavation for the north cell phased construction at the landfill. And that has a budget of 4.6 million for fiscal year 21. There is a $832,000 in the program in solid waste for the purchase of bulk trash equipment. $5.6 million in the program in wastewater for the Luke Air Force Base sewer connection. $13 million for the construction of Glendale Avenue in the streets program. $3 million of construction for Camelback Road in the streets program, and $10.2 million in the pavement management program. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Friedline.
Mayor, can I ask a question about the Luke Air Force Base? Do we have an amortization on how long it's going to be before we get that paid back? Is there already an amortization schedule for that?
Mayor, members of the council, I believe Craig Johnson is working with the Air Force Base on getting an agreement in place. And originally, I think that they We're thinking of a longer timeline, but I believe it's down to 10 years. We can confirm that and get some information for you, but.
Right behind you.
Yeah, never mind.
Thank you.
Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Tomachoff, we're about 98% complete on the contract, and with the IGA with Luke, it's in their hands now. They're going to be looking and getting it back to us next week. We'll be coming to council in June. It'll be a 10-year payback on the design and construction cost for the lift station and the force main.
Mayor, are we charging any interest?
We'll be charging them the debt service for the bonds that we sell for that. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
Thank you. Mayor, City Council, you'll see on this slide, the pavement management program is at $10.2 million. The next slide explains that. This current year's allocation has been $5.2 million. I'm not sure if it was the year before, excuse me, but that's what the standard allocation was for pavement management. I know you've had a pavement management program update last September, I believe. You're going to get one, I think the last meeting workshop in June, and we're going to go over some of the numbers with reference to number one, why $5.2 million is nowhere near enough money to get our system to where it's supposed to be and then to maintain it. This simply shows that we used existing HERF dollars, $3.2 million every year, and existing transportation sales tax at 2.0. Just the next slide would show you, this is a slide of the city, and it tries to represent in general what would be accomplished over a 5-year period using $5.2 million. And essentially, and it's not an exact representation, but it's close. Essentially, it would cover the rest of the street sections that haven't been covered to date since we presented to you the pavement management program in, I believe it was 2016. That's about 270 miles overall, and if you were to extrapolate that out to ask yourself how long would it take to attend to the entire city, it would be a 13-year cycle, much too high for any transportation system. It needs attention at least every 7 years. The next slide shows how we've increased the funding starting next year with reference to continuing to use the $3.2 million in the HERF funds, $2 million in the transportation funds, but in the sales tax funds, the ending fund balance was purposely grown years ago to address a very large cash outlay for the light rail system. If you go back that far, we were working towards a $50 million cash outlay. We currently have an ending fund balance close to $44 million, and with that fund balance, we propose to begin drawing that down. In this case, we're suggesting $1.9 million every year, and again in June we'll show you a lot more about that ending fund balance and how we can continue to invest money in our pavement management program with that fund. The next line item is the contingency that we have in the transportation sales tax at $3.1 million. We feel that's rather robust for a contingency number for that, and we should use that, knowing that we do have about $1 million a year in our HERF for contingency to cover ourselves in case we need something. When you add those together, it's $10.2 million, and that shows for every year for this 5-year period. And again, the next slide would reflect what we can do in difference to the 5.2. This in the red shows you we can cover 550 miles in the city in a 5-year period, which means we can get on a 7-year cycle for the entire city. This also reflects finishing that commitment to cover and touch every street in the city in the next 2 budget years. So what happens at year 3, 4, and 5, we begin to address the streets that we've already treated. In some cases, I would tell you that, we couldn't mill and overlay every street section, so we've done some slurry seal and things of that nature to try to keep those street sections together. And now we get a chance to take a harder look at these streets to try to do a better job at doing a treatment that is much more permanent. That's actually the intent of my part of the presentation for pavement management. This budget reflects an increase of $5 million for next year. That gives us a $10.2 million fund for pavement management. We'll get a lot more into the program at the end of June in a workshop that'll discuss the arterial reconstruction projects, the dollars and the funding used for that, and how we might adjust that to ensure that the pavement management program continues and increases the funding for it, so if nothing else, we keep up with inflation.
Mayor?
Yeah, hold on one second. So I talked with Trevor about this a couple days ago, and I'm just trying to make certain that I understand this. So if we could go up to the 10.2, potentially we would have touched pretty much all the streets within 3 years, and then we go on to a maintenance program rather than a repair program. Is that correct?
Mayor, that's correct. And we're thinking that we can touch every street in 2 years.
Okay, because I know that seems to be the number one biggest factor that I hear consistently day after day after day is our roads. I would be in full support of being much more aggressive and making sure that we have the funds so we don't run out of funds, which I think is what's happened to us in the past. Mr. Milner.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very pleased with the aggressive nature of moving forward with the expedited maintenance program. I just had one question on you mentioned the $44 million fund balance from light rail project that was available, and we're using 1.9 million of that. And again, I'm sure it's somewhere in the budget, but can you tell us how the rest of that money is going to be spent, and if we find it necessary on doing some more major projects within the pavement management program, do we have the ability to increase that using that balance, or where is that balance going to go exactly?
Yes. Mayor, Councilmember Molnar, that's a great question, and it kind of folds into what we'll be presenting to you in June with reference to the totality of the pavement management program. Indeed, we can probably spend more money, but you'll see where we take that ending fund balance and draw down on it to try to maintain a $10 to $11 million base every year and continue to keep seven-year cycles. Hopefully, we look at new technologies as they come about that can possibly create different treatments that'll last longer. But I can assure you, when we present this to you in June, there will not be a $44 million ending fund balance when we're finished describing the pavement management program to you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Tomachow.
Thank you. I am very supportive of this. How much does the transportation sales tax generate annually? Ballpark, it doesn't have to be exact.
Give or take about $24 million a year.
Mayor, members of the council, for the fiscal year 2021, the budget is about 29 million.
20 what?
29 million.
29, okay, so almost $30 million. We've made this commitment already to residents to finish the streets. We were supposed to be finishing, I think, this year. It was going to be five years, and I think maybe next year. I think we started in 2016. So, I mean, we need to keep the commitment. It's the one thing I think we all have in common that we hear the most from our residents about is the condition of our streets. And it's also a pay me now, pay me more later proposition as far as the cost increasing if we don't address it. We've got to have a plan that finishes and then a plan that addresses ongoing maintenance of our streets. So I'm very supportive of this, and I thank you guys for coming up with something that's actually viable.
Ms. Clerk?
Thank you, Mayor. I too am very supportive of the new proposed plan. One question that I did have was, with this more aggressive approach to finally complete, or at least make past one over all residential streets, do we have the capacity, staff-wise, to make sure that we can accomplish what we're proposing?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, if you're referring to being able to oversee the $10.2 million contract, absolutely.
Good. Now, will this, and I'm sure you'll talk about it more at our workshop in June, but will this plan allow us to start looking at arterial streets, or major arterial streets, and start addressing some of the issues with those?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, our June presentation will target the whole idea of how we address arterial reconstructions. This would address arterial treatments such as slurry seal and seal coat, but will not address reconstruction. Those are the highest costs we have. But in June, we'll be able to talk to you about how those are bond funded and what different funding potential we have for that, and the payment management program.
I am really pleased to see this program and what you've been able to accomplish since your short time back. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe a slightly different tone, because it concerns me that it was 4 years ago that we adopted a 5-year pavement management program that was supposed to touch all 700 miles of our streets and get them up into proper condition. And now we're looking today at adopting a 5-year pavement management program that'll finish getting our 700 streets up into a good condition. I understand that on the final years of this, there's going back and touching on some of the streets that already have been, but it just seems like, it feels like to this council member that we were overpromised and underdelivered. And us and our residents were. I'm anxious to, I look forward to the June workshop to see, we must keep our streets in good condition. The effect of that we've suffered during the recession and during the years that the legislature was not passing on the gas tax money that had been going to cities for this kind of work has hurt us significantly. As a street deteriorates, it gets exponentially more expensive to put into good working order. And so we've been suffering from that effect. But I'm committed to all of our streets being something that the residents that live on them can be proud of, and that it becomes one of the things that they compliment us on, or if we can't get that far, at least it will fall down to the bottom, or at least the second 10, top 10 of things that citizens are dissatisfied with. So I do support that we need to get this work done. I just want to have more clarity, more certainty about how it's going to happen, and is it actually going to be happening. So I look forward to June. Thank you.
I have one thing I'd ask you guys if you could talk about in June. Camelback Road has been in really bad shape, and we're spending a lot of money right now in a couple different areas on Camelback Road taking care of that, and I'm happy to see that. But one of the problems that I haven't heard a lot of talk about, but I'm noticing it, is really in the heart of the West Valley part, or the west part of Glendale, and that's up near Westgate. The road takes a tremendous beating. It's too bad we didn't have funds available and a plan where we could have done it when there was no traffic. But that section is really taking a beating right now. I'm hoping that that's in the plan to start addressing soon. So I would like to hear about that at the upcoming meeting. Any other comments?
And with that, we will move on to the changes between the last time council saw the draft CIP, which was back on March 17th, and the current draft CIP, which is before you today. The first project that is listed on this slide is the telecom conduit project. That particular project had just shy of $2.1 million budgeted in the original draft CIP. That budget was in the pay-as-you-go general fund. And for the draft CIP before you, that particular project has been removed. The next project is the fire apparatus replacement project. As you can see in the total column on the right-hand side, the total budget of that project has not changed. However, the timing of when those trucks are going to be purchased has changed slightly. It's moved out 1 year. And after speaking with the department, it's actually more of moving it out by a month. So instead of paying for something before June of fiscal year 21, we will be paying for it in July of fiscal year 21. The next project is the building maintenance reserve. This is also general funded or pay-as-you-go funded. The change in this particular project is a reduction in the budget for fiscal year 21 of $500,000. And as you can see, we begin to ramp that program back up in fiscal year 22. The next project that you will notice a change is the Camelback Ranch Maintenance Reserve project. That project was reduced in fiscal year 21 as it is also general funded or pay-as-you-go funded. And as you can see in fiscal year 21-22, we have increase the funding for that particular project moving forward. The next project is local drainage problems. The plan that you saw back on March 17th did not have $187.5 thousand that the department was able to secure in grant funding. So that has been added to the project, but the 1080 or the general funded portion of the project has been reduced for the first 2 years in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. The next slide is a change in the drainage program. The first project that you see on this slide is the Bethany Home Road storm drain from 58th Avenue to 79th Avenue. That project total is approximately $12.6 million, and that project has actually been removed from the capital improvement program and replaced with the project below it. The Bethany Homes Road Storm Drain project from 43rd Avenue to 51st Avenue has a budget of approximately $9.4 million, so this equates to a savings of $3.6 million.
Mayor, Vice Mayor.
Go ahead, Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, I do have some questions about this. Why the shift from 58th to 79th over to 43rd and 51st? What demanded the shift in storm drain construction? I'm sure there's probably a logical reason, but I'd like to hear it.
Excuse me. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, Don Besser with the Engineering Department. There is a long history to the storm drainage and flood control work that the city's been trying to do. It goes clear back to a Maryvale study that was commissioned by Phoenix, Glendale, and the Flood Control District probably 25 years ago. At that time, there was a thought that this part of Bethany Home would need a huge storm drainage system put into it in this reach. And the cities together, Phoenix and Glendale with the Flood Control District began a phased approach. And part of that was redirecting the drainage off of the 101 when that went in. They created the Bethany Home, the BHOC it's called, the Bethany Home Outfall. So that was a phase of it. There was a phase that involved the canal and moving water from the canal, and then the fourth phase was going to be this. But when we went back and studied it, we commissioned a study a couple of years ago. We realized that all of those other improvements that have been made over the last 15, 20 years actually reduced the problem. So we began looking at that, looking for where could be the next best dollar spent. And really, east of here in this other reach of Bethany Home has much more significant and realistic flooding issues that we think that's the next best dollar spent. So in the future, the work that we would be proposing to do in this reach, the 43rd Avenue to 51 in Bethany Home, will take care of all of that adjacent flooding that we've been experiencing in that vicinity of the Sanderson Ford dealership and that neighborhood. But it will also set us up that if we ever do have to go back into this reach of Bethany Home, it will be a much easier problem to address and a much smaller scale.
Thank you. That's logical, makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next slide is changes in the purchase of equipment for the solid waste program. The first project is commercial front load trucks. An additional $413,000 was added in fiscal year 24-25. The second project is the residential side load trucks. An additional $1.5 million was added to fiscal year 24-25 of that project. And the last is the residential bulk trash equipment. $750,000 was added to fiscal year 25 in that project. These next two slides are changes in the water and sewer programs. First of which is the Integrated Water Master Plan. $500,000 was added to this project in fiscal year 22. The Large Water Valves project had $410,000 added throughout the 10-year program. And the Glendale Avenue sewer line had the project decrease by $4 million over fiscal years 21 through 23.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, I'd like an explanation, and again, there may be a very logical reason. First of all, Glendale Avenue sewer line. Glendale Avenue is long. Which part of Glendale Avenue does this pertain to? And then secondly, why the dramatic decrease by $4 million?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Clark, the original plan was to put a reliever sewer in Glendale Avenue from 91st to 99th. We've been having internal studies done with a consultant, and they provided three options to us. And we selected an option that now we don't have to go all the way down Glendale to 99th Avenue. We're going to change the process. We're going to relieve that sewer that's in the 15-inch in Glendale now and take it down south on 91st Avenue. So we have to come up with a project that will take us underneath the big storm drain in Glendale Avenue, take us to the south along 91st Avenue, and that's going to reduce the cost of this about 50%.
So, if I could follow up, Mayor, this means, and where in the budget would I find the allocation for moving the storm drain southward on 91st Avenue? Where is that in our budget?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, the storm drain or the sewer? The storm drain, no,
The sewer, I'm sorry, sewer line.
Yeah, we have to go underneath the large storm drain with our sewer, and we will go underneath. We will get out of the way for the Glendale Avenue improvements you're going to hear about in June, support the ability to be able to support the Super Bowl in 23. We want to get our sewer and relieve the 15-inch now that's there. We want to relieve that and take that to the south instead of going west to 99th Avenue.
And I understand that, but where in the budget do we show an appropriation for the change?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, it's page 180.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Johnson, so by not going west on Glendale to connect at 99th, and now we're going south on 91st, what do we connect to down there?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Turner, we've got a big sewer that's a 24-inch sewer down on Bethany Home Road. So we'll go south on from Glendale. We'll go south to Bethany Home Road, then we'll go west and tie into the 48-inch that's in Camelback over at 95th.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I'm a layperson on all this, but I'm not sure I understand the logic behind zigzagging it this way and the other way and, you know, taking it down 91st to Bethany, then tearing up our brand-new Bethany, which is called Cardinals Way, by the way. Tearing up all of that work, new road on Cardinals Way, and then shifting it south along 95th. Isn't there a more direct approach to this than doglegging it at least twice?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Clark, we're not going to be, we're going to be tying into an existing sewer that's already in Bethany Home Road, and it ties into 95th, and it'll go south into our large collector sewer in Camelback. One of the main reasons that we chose this option is, one is it's less cost, two, it's easier to do that project because we don't have to do large pump arounds, because that 15-inch that's in Glendale right now, to actually replace that, we'd have to do large pump arounds for large quantities of wastewater all the way from 91st to 99th Avenue, which was really expensive in the cost estimate for that project. So, and also the timing of that was really key to make sure that we get all that extra work done before the Super Bowl. This way we can, at a lesser cost, we can go down, we can reroute the sewer in a different location and not impact the Glendale reconstruction or the timing for the Super Bowl.
Okay, follow up. So that means Cardinals Way doesn't get torn up because there's already an existing sewer line that you're tying into, correct?
Councilmember Clark, that's correct.
So which streets will see work? 91st from Glendale to Bethany?
From Glendale to Bethany and 91st, that's correct.
Okay, and then 95th from Bethany southward?
And then 95th already has a sewer in
Okay.
it, so that we'll just reroute the sewer from along the Bethany sewer over to 95th and let it
Okay.
go on down to Camelback.
So this simplifies the whole process, and the only thing that we will see torn up is along 91st between Glendale and Bethany.
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
The next slide shows a change to the sewer line extension project. The original plan had $400,000 in fiscal year 2021, and the draft plan before you doesn't have any new money within the existing plan, but there is $465,200 in carryover in this project in fiscal year 21. And below that is overall changes to the water and sewer program. As you can see in the total on the right-hand side, the total 10-year program for water and sewer decreased by approximately $3.5 million. But in each fiscal year, you can see in the area with the CIP that's before you, that they've basically just smoothed out their CIP so that it's more manageable for them to execute.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
thank you. So the sewer line extension that we just touched on very briefly a minute ago, can we hear a little bit more about that? We're not doing a sewer line extension somewhere, and we're saving $400,000.
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Turner, the sewer line extension project, as well as the water line extension project, is money we set aside for supplementing development. So if we want them to extend a sewer or enlarge a sewer different than what it's going to take to support their development, we usually have money set aside for that. So the money that we had set aside right now is $400,000, but we were carrying over $465,000. So we're going to take the $400,000 out and just substitute it with the carryover of $465,000. So we'll keep at least $400,000 available for any sewer line extension that may come up from development.
Okay, so in layman's terms, we need 400,000. Instead of adding 400 to it, we're going to take it out of the pocket that we've already got it in and move it forward and keep 400,000 for other purposes.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, that's correct.
Okay. And then on the the sewer project, the 91st Avenue decision to go that route instead of over 99th, we save about $4 million there. Is that what I heard you say?
That's correct, sir.
That's good work, thank you. And then on the bottom half of this slide that's up here now, we've got water and sewer program changes that over the course of the CIP are range of $400 million. I won't ask you to detail all those out for us at this time, but is there a detail of that somewhere that if we wanted to see what, if we or if the public wanted to see what are these water and sewer program changes that are planned out over the next 5 to 10 years?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, there is detail.
And where would they go to look to find that?
That's in our water and sewer summaries for our project start in page 199 and go to 220.
Mayor,
232.
if I could interrupt just for one moment.
Go ahead.
Again, what this bottom piece of this represents is the only change to the draft CIP is that 3.5 million, and it's the sum of the items that you saw above. The rest of this isn't really a change overall, because they were going to spend 412 million. They're now spending 408. That's the difference of the 3.5. It's just year by year, they spread the projects out a little bit differently. And the draft CIP that you have before you, as Mr. Johnson said on those pages, already reflects the smoothing out of those over the course of the 5 years.
Thank you.
And with that, we would open it up for council discussion and are looking to get consensus on the draft capital improvement program.
Good.
Surprise, I have some questions. Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to use the spreadsheet you gave us, because some of this I find a little confusing. And I'm going to start with capital repair arena. It showed $500,000 every year for the next 5 years. And the changes show no money until $500,000 in 24-25. But I don't see a slide here that it's a change, so.
Mayor, members of the council, maybe it bears explaining this document a little bit. So when you see in the column the no change, essentially that just means there was no change. So it doesn't mean that it's not budgeted there. It means that whatever we had in 20 is the same. And so on the one that you're referring to, the capital repair arena, it was $500,000 a year. It remains at $500,000 a year. And that last $500,000 is just the $500,000 that was in year 6 through 10 coming forward 1 year.
Okay, Mayor, I have more questions. Ballpark Boulevard, I see in fiscal year, in this upcoming CIP, another $1,257,600. We're not finished spending money on Ballpark Boulevard.
We'll defer that question to Mr. Eversole. Oh, sorry, Mr. Bessler.
Mayor, Don Bessler, Councilmember Tomachoff, I apologize, I didn't quite hear your question.
I see in the CIP $1.2 million for Ballpark Boulevard for this year's CIP. I thought we were finished with Ballpark Boulevard.
Mayor, Councilmember, the Ballpark Boulevard has 2 phases to it. The first phase that we did complete this year. The second phase is the area basically south of Ballpark Boulevard and at the 99th Avenue intersection, so that we need to, it's the relocation of the Roosevelt Irrigation District ditch and the completion of the width of the road in that area, the next half lane at least. So that's the piece that couldn't be accomplished in the timeline that we had laid out for us last year.
Okay.
It was broken into 2 phases.
All right, thank you. Oops, Mayor, it would have been helpful when I was looking at this to know that it says changes and then there's no money there. I believe that that's what the change was, so Some of these questions may sound pretty dumb, because I thought Northern Parkway had been eliminated, so I don't need to ask that question, right? That means there's no changes?
Mayor, members of the council, that's correct. If it's a
Okay.
0, there was no change.
All right. If there was carryover money, that money is included in what's left here. Just for example, Thunderbird Park improvements, there was $150,000 in carryover. That remains available in addition to the ones, I guess I need to ask the question. There's been no change if it's not blue? Is that what that means?
Mayor, members of the council, the blue lines on this schedule indicate it's a brand-new project that did not exist in the current CIP, in the 20 CIP. And so it's a new project that was added for 2021. The carryover isn't on this worksheet, so, because it's complicated and you can't really calculate a change off of a carryover. That would be very confusing. And so, but if there was a project in the CIP with carryover, it's not on this schedule, but it is in the CIP.
Okay, thank you. I did want to have a discussion quickly, and I brought this up before, about Heroes Park Lake, because what we're showing in the CIP is, I believe there was some carryover money for design, and then there's money in, I guess I have to, in next fiscal year for the lake, but there's no more money available for the build-out of Heroes Park until at least 5 or 6 more years. So there's another $46 million available. And I'm just curious, because I know what I keep hearing is that that there's not enough meeting space for people in the area. And I don't know when the residents were surveyed or whether those residents even still live in the area. And since it's going to be a long wait to accommodate more meeting space would you, and I want to be supportive of what your residents want, but would you be willing to survey the residents and find out what order they want to have this done in, whether they'd rather wait on the lake and have the money for something that would be something that apparently is an immediate need, is more meeting space, and start on a frac type facility there at Heroes Park and put the lake out in the out years?
Mayor, if I might answer that, I think the definitive answer I can answer already is no. A frac type facility will cost millions and millions, far more than the $4 million that is allocated for the lake. The demand is for recreational opportunity, and the lake will satisfy part of that request. It's my intent to come back after the lake is completed and ask us to look at at least minimally expanding the library to include just a larger meeting room to accommodate the needs of the general public in that area that require a larger meeting space. But no, and it's funny you bring that up, because there was a lot of comment yesterday afternoon about Heroes Park Lake on the Nextdoor app site. And while people are grateful, very, very grateful, that the lake is being done, there was also additional comment that they've waited far too long. So I think reneging on the promise to do the lake and diverting it to something else at this point would raise more consternation than approval at this time.
Mayor?
Thank you.
Okay. I just don't because you can't use, I just found out, you can't use radio-controlled boats and things. I mean, what can you do to recreate on the lake? Will it be stocked with fish, or what? Because I don't know what the plan is for the lake. I mean, how does the lake accomplish?
Well,
just out of curiosity, because there's a lot of lakes in my district, but nobody can use them because you're not allowed to fish in them. You're not allowed to use radio-controlled devices on them. They're just literally just to look at. So
this will be a fishing lake.
It will be.
Yeah, it'll be similar to the one out at Bonzo. But I think, too, it's also a signature amenity that defines the park at the intersection of 83rd and Bethany. but I think it's also an opportunity for passive recreation in and around the lake as well.
Mayor, if I could,
Let me address what you were just talking about. One of the things the reason that they don't fish in the lakes that you're in, I think, is because of reclaimed water, where this lake is actually designed to have water coming in from SRP, going through and then draining back out, so it's fresh water all the time. And then, as far as radio controlled, that's the first I've heard that. If we have rules that you can't use radio controlled boats, well, we're the council, we can change that rule. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't have sailboats out there with remote control in order to guide it. It makes no sense to me.
I agree with you, Mayor. I just found out about that just literally today, so.
That's something we can take care of.
And one thing I would like to say, and I mean, just so that shouldn't be lost on the residents in Yucca, that there was a lake built in Yucca, but it was built inside Camelback Ranch. So, I mean, those decisions were made long before I ever got here, but there was a humongous investment made that included a lake that literally no one can use. So, thank you.
Mayor.
Let me make sure I didn't have another question here. I guess I'm going to have to look at this more because I didn't really understand what it meant before. I guess the overall question, Mayor, if I could, was that there was a reduction of, if I'm understanding this, of about $14 million in the overall CIP? These columns don't carry over, so I have to.
Mayor, members of the council, we can do some math on the overall numbers, but year by year, so the 2021, which is the in the green on the last page, is a $16.5 million reduction in 2021 CIP. But then after that, there's additions of 11 million, 25 million, 9 million, and then 104 million. But the 104 million, again, is the last year that used to be in year 6 through 10, just coming forward. So in the 20 CIP, there was nothing in that last column. It has to, every year you add another year on, take the first year out, so.
Okay. Mayor, one more question. Are we setting aside any money for, I hate to use the term, but I will because everybody knows how I feel about Camelback Ranch. Instead of being nickeled and dimed to death on, beer lines and telephones, are we setting aside, I just hate that this isn't a slush fund. This year it's only $836,000, which was our amount for many years. I seen it was going to be 1.6 million, but I would like to see at least $1 million of that dedicated towards something that is literally capital and improves. I mean, there's a lot of concrete, there's seats, there's all kinds of things that we're really not addressing other than just, it seems more like cosmetic stuff and things. Are we planning for? How are we planning for? I mean, it's the same amount of money year after year after year for facilities like that, for actual capital in those buildings.
Michelle, did you want to answer that question, or Jack?
Mayor, Councilmember Talmachoff, if you'll see in the CIP, years 2 through 10 has increased, doubled to $1.6 million. That's a reflection of the obvious need for an asset that's well over $100 million that needs attention. And I am sure as we move forward, and I don't know how old it is now, maybe 15 years old, there's going to be a lot more than just cosmetic issues that we'll have to address. But that's one of the reasons why it's increased to that degree.
Mayor, if I could, I know you weren't here last year, Jack, but last year they asked for $1.6 million, which included 100 $500 chairs, beer lines, and other things. So even when we were going to allocate the 1.6, was $1,625,761, phone headsets, TVs, projectors. So my point is, that doesn't really address capital needs at the facility. So if we're going to be doing $1.673 million, I would like to see that money address capital needs at the facility and not TVs, projectors, chairs, things like that. So I don't know how we dial that back, because the facility, as you said, is going to, it already has capital needs, other than just, things that somehow we need to dial this back a little bit and say, we're willing to go $1.6 million, but this money, this is what we're going to do this year. We're going to address seats or things that are literally part of the facility.
Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, just to be clear, there's no infrastructure issues that are massive in this asset that I know of that need direct attention today. But as I said before, as an asset, I know that we're going to move towards that, and I hear you loud and clear with reference to certainly never supplanting something like concrete spalling and things of that nature for a $200 chair. I totally understand what you're saying. I hear you loud and clear.
All right, and by the way, Mayor, if I could, when we were out there last year to tour the facility, there were some capital needs pointed out to us on that tour. So some of the, where the concrete, I don't remember exactly what it was, but Michelle was there. There were some capital needs pointed out to us that, some seats and some other things that were literally part of the facility that were pointed out to us that we're going to need some attention. And if we keep spending this money on relatively minor things, we're never going to have the money to spend on the facility. Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you. I would remind, and you were not here at the time, but I would remind Councilmember Tomachoff that our library is sitting in Gripstick as well, with reference to the lake at Camelback Ranch. In 2006, council diverted all of the money that was at that time appropriated for the library and diverted it to Gripstick. So that's a conversation that I don't think we all need to get into any further. Mayor, I do have a series of questions about various elements within the capital improvement program, so I hope you'll bear with me. And I'd like to start on page 39, which is the underground storage tank replacement. I thought we just did that, and so I would like somebody to answer why we've got $450,000 budgeted in 2024. Is this to replace the underground storage that we just replaced?
Mayor, members of the council, Michelle Moitenko is coming up.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, we just recently replaced the underground storage tanks at Fire Station 153 and Fire Station 155. We did not touch the tanks at the Glendale Operations Complex. This money is placed there. As we continually evaluate these tanks, we believe that we'll need capital repairs at that time. So it is to replace the tanks we have not touched yet.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that explanation. On page 91, with regard to the park summary by funding source, Fund 4320, Diff Parks and Recreation Zone 1 East. Carry over $127,000. It is expected to generate $66,000 in fiscal year 2021. That seems like a very low number considering all of the construction that is going on in the district. We have, Zunhero has a lot coming. And so I wondered why that number is so low. That's $66,000. That's all we anticipate in diff?
Mayor, members of the council, the $66,000 in fiscal year 21 is the expected expenditure, not the expected revenue.
Sorry. It says summary by funding source, so I assume that was the amount of funds. If it's not, I apologize in misreading. Page 95 and numerous pages under, following that. Parking, we have park lighting, park infrastructure improvements, park play structures, and so on. We are allocating $10 million a year for park infrastructure. Why are these listed as separate items and not part of that $10 million package that we are allocating to fix park infrastructure? I don't understand this.
Mayor, members of the council, again, my recollection is that we discussed this when we did the first draft of the CIP back
And we'll
in-
probably discuss it again because I
in
still
March.
don't understand it.
And the consensus of the council at the time was to leave it this way. There is the 10.5 million, and then there are separate projects that were for park lighting. And so overall, when you add them all together, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 or 56 million. But we didn't receive any direction at the time to remove those
But
projects.
that's over a 10-year period, right? 55, 56 million. You're talking about over the life of the CIP program, are you not?
Mayor, members of the council, I'm referring to those projects that were funded through GEO bonds, and that's about what it totals. There are other projects in there as well. The total CIP for parks is larger than that if you include the whole 10 years. But the projects you're talking about specifically and the 10.5 million a year, I believe those total roughly 55 or 56 million.
Okay, so if we're pulling out park lighting separately for, let's just take year 2021, it's only 98,000, but the following year it goes up to 820,000 and remains there for several years. So we take park lighting, park infrastructure improvements, that's the $10 million that we're allocating beginning in 2022. What are we going to use this money for if we're pulling out everything as a separate line item? If lighting is separate, park play structures are separate, and so on. What is the park infrastructure money? We even pull out parking lots as a separate expense. What will park infrastructure improvements include?
Mayor, members of the council, the plan for the parks, again, and we'll be seeing this soon, actually, because I believe we're scheduled June 9th to do a first review of the master plan. And so the plan for parks is to finish the master plan, get it adopted and reviewed and with the council. And as part of that, there'll be some recommendations about what to do with the parks. And then council can use that information, which is part of the public process, to start redefining how we're going to spend, for example, that $10.5 million every year. At this point, it's a high-level placeholder. It was put there as part of the GEO bond prioritization process. And it will need to be defined and pulled out individually into projects. And those haven't been clearly identified and defined yet because we're waiting for the master plan, which again is coming to council for a first review on June the 9th.
Thank you. I guess my only comment would be is I would like to see us lump everything associated with parks together instead of putting something here and something there and something somewhere else. It becomes extremely difficult to track where the money is going, how much is going, how much of that is included in the $10 million, or is it even included in the $10 million? So I will offer that again when we have our discussion about parks at a later workshop. The next item, if I might continue, Mayor, there's no page number. Well, it would be page 108. Amphitheater renovations. We don't even have that scheduled until the last 5 years. And I know it's been pushed back, but here we are we're looking at, for example, doing entertainment in the park. It was scheduled for April, but because of COVID, it had to be pushed back to later on in the year, hopefully. But the point is, here we are working toward encouraging people to come to Murphy Park and use the amphitheater, and yet there seems to be no desire to improve that experience. Not for this year, because I think it's too late, but I think at some point we ought to be having a discussion about how we can move up incrementally and start looking at that amphitheater and making it more usable for not just the patrons who will be at the amphitheater, but for the various acts that actually use the amphitheater. I know that there are problems there. We need to be addressing them.
Hold on, Mr. Phelps.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark. When I originally got here in 16, I was soon after that I proposed maybe looking at the amphitheater as a strategy for downtown, if you recall, but it was really built on a major repivot to where we did less focus on our large events, and we went to a model to where we could use the amphitheater literally 10 to 12 months a year on a regular basis. As we know, we had concerns from our merchants about doing that. So it felt like to accelerate and to spend the $4 million on the amphitheater when we're still going to, at least for the foreseeable future, we're going to maintain our large festival approach to how we spend our $1.2 million. It didn't seem like that would be a priority. But if it is a priority for the council, you can certainly move it up. But in my mind, the significant investment in the amphitheater would really, as a recommendation, should be predicated upon a major pivot on how you would use that asset to get maximum amount of use out of it. With regards to our month of April that was planned here and that we'll be working on in the hopefully 2 different months in the coming budget year, this will give us a really good a test to see how this will work. And we're going to be bringing a stage in and bringing sound and lights in, which was one of the big benefits of the amphitheater remodel. So I think it'll give us an opportunity to see whether the merchants like the activity that was maybe built more around an entertainment model that has consistent entertainment every weekend. And then if that's the case, certainly we can accelerate the amphitheater project. But it was basically put out because because of those reasons.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer. I think it will be dependent upon the data generated by the use of the amphitheater consistently over this month of pilot programming that we're going to be doing there. So that makes sense. But I think at some point we may have to address it. Next page is 133, and it's solid waste software process implementation. Got $100,000 budgeted for this coming fiscal year under solid waste, $200,000 the following year too. So the total cost is $500,000. I was disappointed when the new citywide software program was brought to us, Simplicity, and we've been discovering that we need to create interfaces between the old software and the new software, yada yada. That there are hidden costs or expenses associated with the purchasing and implementation of new software. So I would like to find out from staff at some point, how compatible will this new software process improvement be with our old software that is currently in use? Are there hidden costs that are not incorporated within the $500,000? And lastly, what's the annual license fee for a new software program? Those are not questions that have to be answered right now, but I would certainly like more information on this and any other software implementation. Give us all the costs, not just the cost of purchasing the program, but the costs associated with integrating the new software with the old software. Next item is on page 173, and it's bus stop access enhancements through MAG. So it's probably it is a transportation grant. But my question is the $90,000 for fiscal year 2021 the only funds we are allocating for bus stop improvements? Or is there another funding source that will accompany this 90,000? Because 90,000 is nothing.
Mayor and Council, no, there's an additional $150,000 annually allocated towards bus stop enhancements.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Mayor, I believe those are all the TAB questions that I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, on the three-ring binder that we have for the CIP program, there's a tab for parks. It also correlates to page 89. And prior to the meeting starting, I left each of you and the key staff that's present some photographs from Saguaro Ranch Park, specifically the group picnic area. I think you're all familiar with it. I'm sure you've been to events there for many of the different groups that use it, community groups that use this, as well as the businesses and families and everyone else. It's a very popular part of that park, and obviously I'm very proud to have that park in my district, but it's a regional park. It serves the entire city. We get people from, every district that use it for their events, and of course we get a certain number, I don't know exactly what percentage, but some from outside the city. But it's really it's one of the prides of Glendale, I think. Though by looking at these photographs, our pride might be a tad diminished. You can see from them, like on the first one there at the top of the first page, just a general lack of painting, particularly in the areas that are exposed to the sunlight and the rain. Certainly need attention. The bottom one on the first page, particularly those horizontal beams at the top that support the Ramada structure, you can see that on the post, at the top of the post on the right, that that horizontal beam has rotted away far enough to produce probably a 2-inch drop in from where it should be. You can see both at the bottom and the top, and on the post to the left, the horizontal beams there, you can certainly see a lot of paint peeling, but if you were present and closer, you would see that there's a fair amount of wood rot there. On the second page, you can see the photograph of the picnic tables that are in there. The finish on them has been worn down, virtually completely, both on the tops and on the seats, and we're down to the porous wood surface and a lot of gouging and unevenness there. The next photograph is, there's a bird nest there in the corner is what I really wanted to point out that we need to be taking care of, plus just either a power wash or cleaning. The paint's not in particularly bad condition there. The next photo is a close-up of that wood rot, see right above that post on the two beams that carry the load from above. And then the last picture is one of the vertical supports out there. Most of them aren't in this condition. There's only this one and maybe one other of these where the rot from the ground is, I think you can pass a pencil underneath that post. It's only it's not actually, the majority of it I don't think is sitting on the standard that it's on. It's, the load's being borne by the bolts that go through it. So my point to this is that I've asked if this kind of repair work is in the budget for this coming year, and I've been told that it is not, that there might be $10,000 in the Saguaro Ranch budget that could be used to do a study of what needs to be done for the Ramadas there. But I think the photographs here pretty much tell the story. And in in keeping with our adopted policies for our CIP program, is that we take care of that which we already own first. I think that we're failing here, and we need to take care of this particular thing, and we need to do it this year. So I don't know, I mean, obviously there's scraping and painting and power washing that needs to be done, but there's also real repair work that needs to be done with those beams and with those picnic tops and that sort of thing. So I'm asking the council to provide the money in either the CIP program or the operating budget, but we can put it in the CIP program with pay-as-you-go funds if we choose. We have the money to do it, so that a year from now, and much sooner than that, hopefully, that this part of that facility will be back in a condition that we can be proud of it. If you may ask me what is the dollar amount associated with that, I will admit that I don't know. To the layperson, it looks like $100,000 would go a long way there, but staff may have a more general estimate of what it might be, but if so, I'd like to hear it, but I would like to see if we can't get some consensus from the council that this facility be brought back up into a condition that is safe, secure, well-maintained, and one that we can be proud of.
Mayor, member of council, Mr. Turner, we're contracting right now to hire a structural engineer to come out and evaluate that, because in our opinion, working with Michelle and engineering, it's a little beyond just maintenance and painting, and we're concerned about the structural integrity of it. So we're contracting with that. We've got a proposal. Once we get them under contract, we'll get a study done and then come back and make a presentation on what the findings is, and then it'll have a number of what it would take to rebuild or restructure or to repair what it needs to be done before we can come back and then paint.
Mayor, Mr. Burke, but if that money's not in our budget, then there's $9,000 in carryover funds for Saguaro Ranch in this budget. So if the money's not in the budget, then we're waiting another year to get the work done? Or should we put a placeholder amount in our budget this year that seems like it should be sufficient, and so that we can get this taken care of in this budget year?
Mayor, members of the council, on page 89, towards the bottom of the page, about 1/6 down, there is a budget of $300,000 for the Saguaro Ranch master plan, along with the $9,000 of carryover from the prior year.
Thank you, Ms. Camacho, but that master plan money's already allocated, and it's for more planning. There's not actually any improvement of the park. It's just figuring out what might need to be done. So we need real hard dollars to fix this problem, and I think my point was, and I don't disagree with Mr. Perk, that it is real physical work that needs to be done. It's not just cleaning and painting. Which is what makes it a capital program, and Mr. Burke has a rough idea of a placeholder amount. I'd like to hear it, and maybe we can get a consensus to get that in this budget.
Mayor and Councilmember Turner, I don't have a number right now. Excuse me. When we look at it, there are a number of places where the posts have metal straps for wind load control, and those are completely rotted away. There are some where they're on concrete pedestals that are underneath the slab, and I don't know what's going on there structurally. I'm not a structural engineer. We really need a complete evaluation. There was some work done in the past where some posts were sistered, meaning a second post was bolted to it, and some of those appear to the layperson to be not serving the function they were designed to do. And then there's the structural beam in the one walkway that you identified in your photograph that has clearly got, I don't know if it's dry rot or wet rot or what it is, but it's rotted wood and the paint has peeled away completely. So we need a structural assessment, and we need to have them tell us what that order of magnitude. I can't begin to guess if 100,000 is anywhere near enough, the number you mentioned, or if it's a much more comprehensive rebuild and structural support. So until I have that and can come back to you and make a suggestion, I don't know if it's something you could put a placeholder in or anticipate it would be a contingency expense next year or how we would approach it. But
Mayor, members of the council, if I could just jump in. As Mr. Burke mentioned, once we know more about it, there's always the option to pull funding from contingency if that's, that would be something that would come back to council along with sort of the assessment. The problem with not knowing the number is, well, number one, we don't know the number, but number two is it, depending on what type of work needs to be done, it could qualify for a different funding source. So for example, if it is structural and there are something that we're going to do to rebuild it or rebuild parts of it or some different things like that, then it's a potential GO bond funded project. If it's not, then we'd have to be looking probably for general fund dollars to refurbish it, and that's maintenance dollars. So without really knowing which way it's going to go, it makes it difficult now to know how much to put in and under what funding source. But we do have options once we get that number to come back to council and present that information and get some direction on what council would like to do. And we should have that number because Jim is looking at engaging a structural engineer to look into it now.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you, Ms. Rios. So as you might be able to tell, I'm frustrated that this has been allowed to get into the condition it is in. It hasn't just happened. And we're supposed to be taking care of that which we have, and the municipal neglect of our facilities gradually drives us into the situation where we were with Glen Lakes. We need to be doing a better job of maintaining this and being out in front of these kinds of things. Now, so there's structural components, and if staff feels like we need to have a structural engineer and do a study, then is there money in this budget to get that done? And then secondly, the non-structural components, such as the tabletops and the seating and that sort of thing that would make a world of difference to the experience out there. Is there money available to do that? And if not, how do we get that portion of it done that doesn't require a study by an engineer?
Mayor, members of council, Councilman Turner, yes, we have money in this current fiscal year in my parks budget, which will do the structural study. So we're getting ready to contract that. David Beard, the city engineer, is looking at the scope now, and we're working with his staff to bring on a structural engineer who's on an annual service contract. That'll take a week or so to get the contract together. The engineer said it would take probably 3 weeks to a month to get a report submitted to us. We'll have some numbers to evaluate. And at this point in the fiscal year, I don't believe I have the resources in the department to look at those tabletops. We can certainly get started on that and evaluate and begin using the new fiscal year money to tackle that issue.
So Mayor, Mr. Burt, so to tackle that issue, does it mean that a year from now or 6 months from now, we think we'll have seats and tabletops out there? I don't, for all I know, all those boards could be, taken apart, flipped over, sanded down and refinished, and we'd be in great condition for another, 20 years with just regular maintenance. And is that something that you feel we can accomplish?
I believe we can take a look at that, and we either can bring a contractor in and do that work or try to do it with my staff resources, but we haven't begun looking at that yet.
Okay. Well, I hear that we can, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but we can look at anything in a year's time, but, and I get that it involves, some planning. Who knows, this might be a great project for a Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout, looking for a project to do, or for a service group, or something like that, but I'd like to have more a sense of greater confidence that we're going to do more. We're going to actually accomplish something out there this year rather than just study and look.
Well, Mayor, members of council, what I meant was at the beginning of the new fiscal year, we'll tackle that problem. We'll take on those boards with my existing operating budget.
Okay.
Could you have someone from your staff just look at those tabletops and give us a rough idea what they think it might cost to finish them off in the seats to where they're usable within a couple weeks? Just a rough idea. I don't even need an exact, just a rough idea.
Yes, Mayor and council, I can do that.
All right, that'd be great.
Mayor? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, do we want to continue to talk on this discussion, or do we have, I had another item I wanted to.
Wherever you want.
Did you want to continue to talk on this?
I don't know if, I had something on this particular topic. I don't know how you want to do it. We can come
Yeah,
back to it.
I'll wait until we're finished with this topic.
Okay, well then actually Jamie was next.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, to this topic, I hope that we do something in the immediate to address those issues on the structure out there for that park. But also, I think what we need to do, I feel we need to do, is start spending more dollars in preventive maintenance than we are in proactive maintenance. It always costs us more, and we end up having to justify why we need that work completed. I know we have great staff that can do that. We need to start talking about investing in preventive maintenance dollars and in a program that our staff can implement to prevent these things from happening. I'm not going to prevent it 100%, but I think it'll be very helpful and reduce those costs when we find them early. So not this time around, but we really need to start looking into investing dollars for preventive maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little baffled how a park with its own master plan ends up in this condition, honestly. There's no other word for it. It's literally mismanagement. I mean, if this was painted, if it was part of the park's master plan to paint the structure and take care of this wood every year, that we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. So I just don't understand how we got here, and that it takes a council member going out and taking pictures before anybody reacts and starts contacting structural engineers and actually getting something done. We should not be reactive. We should be proactive. It's easy to see. There's parks people out in these parks, hopefully on a daily basis, that should be noticing things that the parks need. And especially a park with its own master plan, and a significant park like Saguaro Ranch is for the citizens of Glendale and really the community at large. I mean, it's not just Glendale citizens that use this. For it to end up like this is, I mean, I honestly just don't understand how this happens, because if wood is taken care of, it can last years and years and years. So, we've got to do better. We've got to have, I agree with Councilmember Aldama, a way better proactive maintenance on things that we're doing in our parks. We should be painting things and taking care of things before they break down and end up costing us 4 or 5 times what it would have done if we would have just done the maintenance. So it's not good management of taxpayer money either, to wait till you need to have a structural engineer come out and maybe take down beams and shore this thing up because we just didn't do anything until it was too late. So it's really disappointing that we're here. I do have a question, though, about Rose Lane, because we are aware that there's a huge repair, and I'm totally supportive of it, but are we putting it in the CIP? Are we using contingency, or how are we addressing the financial part of fixing the pool at Rose Lane?
Mayor, members of the council, I can probably attempt to answer that question. So we do have some preliminary estimates on the cost of repairing Rose Lane, and because of COVID-19, and the changes that we made specifically with our temporary employees for Parks and Recreation, and some vacancies within Parks and Recreation and the hiring freeze and various things like that, we think that we can find enough funding from that and potentially some other sources within Mr. Burke's budget to cover the repairs. We're still working on that. We're still looking into, is that going to be enough to do all of the things that we need to do out there? But we believe that he will be able to absorb it within his budget, again, because of the savings that he has from not having used temporary staff for some of his programs this year.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
I guess I want to try to be clear on this. I need to defend Mr. Burke. I do take exception to the notion that it's been mismanaged. Mr. Burke and his team spend every dollar that the council gives towards maintenance. The reality of it is we're underfunded through a variety of reasons. And it's not this council's fault per se, but when I got here in 2016, we had a very specific goal. We need to get to 50 million. And so we had to put money aside that could have easily, because it was general fund dollars, that could have very easily got into things like park maintenance and facility maintenance. We, not the choosing of this council, but we were dealt those cards that we've had to deal with. We're going to get into this in the park master plan. So here's some facts that you'll learn in the park master plan. We looked at our kind of comparable cities here in the valley, including like, Gilbert, Scottsdale, Surprise, Peoria, et cetera. Not even including, this does not include Thunderbird Conservation Park, but we have the highest ratio of acres per resident in the entire, of all of our comp cities. That's a good news. We have more park space than any other comparable city, not by a little bit, actually by a lot. The bad news is the amount of money that we allocate in our budget towards maintenance of parks is the lowest of anybody of the comparable cities. So we have this paradigm. We have the most amount of acres, and yet we spend less per acre than any of those other comp cities. We need to work together to try to figure out how we can close that gap so that we can begin addressing this. Really, for Mr. Burke and for his team, there's not a single thing, any one item we couldn't fix, but you're squeezing the balloon. So if we paint there or we put resources there, we'll have to make decisions on other parks and other infrastructure that we can't do. And so we want to work, and this has been a priority, and we felt, quite frankly, this was going to be the first year, budget-wise, that we would have significant amount of new dollars to be able to invest in things like our parks, and especially on our O&M, and kind of maintaining and being a better steward of our assets. And then, of course, March showed up, and everything's kind of taken a little bit of a back seat to be able to do that. I want you to know your city manager recognizes that the condition of a lot of our assets, whether it be our pavement, whether it be our facilities, and whether it be our parks, we have a lot of work to do to be able to get to where we want to be at. But this is an issue of money. I don't believe that Mr. Burke and his team are wasting dollars. I think they're trying to squeeze as much out of those dollars as possible and to cover as much of our 90 parks that we have to maintain. And probably in those 90 parks, every single park probably has items like Councilmember Turner has identified, that things we should be trying to stay on top of and moving forward on. And so again, it's good news, bad news. It's great we offer our city 90 parks. The challenge has been is that we just haven't, and this has gone on for decades, we haven't been able to keep up on the maintenance, and then we lose a pool like O'Neill Pool. We have other things that happen that cause us then to get into almost a management by catastrophe rather than trying to get ahead of this and investing on the front end. Our goal with the master plan process is to help the council prioritize where we want to go with our parks. And then once we have that priority of what we want to do, then I think we'll be able to come back and put together hopefully an effective plan of showing you how we can manage the assets and how we can also add to our existing asset base. It's just, I don't know if you were trying to say it was mismanaged per se, but it is, we manage the resources that we get, I think, very effectively. We just probably collectively as a community, we don't have enough money. Remember, general fund is what typically would pay for a good portion other than DIF projects, which can't go towards maintenance. This is a general fund item, which means we compete not only with our internal services, but we compete with public safety, and and things like libraries and other things that are high priorities. We're going to have to figure out a way to continue to grow our revenue, to focus on that, and then also hopefully to be able to start putting more and more money into our capital plan so that we can maintain. I agree. When you see the condition of the Ramada at Saguaro Ranch, it shouldn't be acceptable. Last time that I think this was when the former Parks Director Eric Strunk was here, he shared with me that at Saguaro Ranch by itself, we probably have close to $1 million of below-ground electrical problems. So I mean, that if you did a tour today, you wouldn't even see it today, but it's almost $1 million just to start kind of bringing the electrical up. So we've got our work to do as a community. I think the council has done a great job of focusing on economic development and kind of growing our revenue. And I think that's ultimately going to be our solution, is if we can continue to grow our revenue base and then through the budgeting process, continue to put more money towards priority items like the parks. I think we can make a huge, significant dent towards that area.
Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't trying to single anybody out, but this is the reason why we want to know what is being asked for in the supplementals. Because quite possibly, this could have been asked for 6 years since I've been here, and I wasn't necessarily aware of it. So that's the problem with us not knowing what the departments, because they know what their needs are, but we don't know what their needs are specifically. Maybe the council members know in their own district what their needs are, and that's not to try to get into the city manager's lane, but that's the reason why we want to know, and this was helpful this year, so we know what was asked for. So, I mean, get it in front of the council and see if we want to prioritize it and find a way to pay for it. That's all I'm asking, is that this hasn't found its way in front of us still yet, and I've been here for going on 6 years. So we've got to find a better way. I understand we all know what our financial situation is, but I think we can do a better job of managing the resources that we have. And I want to know, when is the Parks Master Plan going to be finished? Because if I recall, it was in August, it'll be 2 years ago that it was supposed to be finished. So when will we have a master plan so we can start at least because until we get that, I don't know how we start.
Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, members of the council, again, we're coming back to you in a workshop. It will not be a finalized master plan for one reason. They've done a tremendous, in fact, we had a good meeting yesterday with the consultant. They've collected a tremendous amount of data and feedback from our constituents, our citizens and users. But we didn't want to put it and say it's final, because we believe that we'll provide you the data and the information that was gleaned from talking to our citizens. And then the other data they've collected in terms of how many acres we have to cover and some of the comparative data. And then we want the council to prioritize and kind of put the finality on the plan. So what this will be is in June, is we will lay out a lot of information, receive feedback and hopefully consensus from the council, and then the consultant will wrap that up very shortly thereafter and finalize the plan. So we just didn't want to come back and say to the council, here's a final plan, when you haven't had a chance really to review it and to put your fingerprints and kind of your input on it. But we will be having that in June.
Okay, Mayor, and if I could ask one more question. We should have our revenue numbers for March, or do we have? I mean, how far off are we of what we forecast and where we ended up?
Mayor, members of the council, for the month of March, typically in a month, we get about, comparison from the prior year, typically we get about $10 million a month in sales tax. And for the month of March, it was roughly $900,000 less. So 10% or so less than what we received in the prior year. So that doesn't sound altogether that bad. However, it's April when things were, as you'll recall, we were open more than around half of March. And so we won't know the April numbers until June. We have said we'll get back to you on that, but we won't know April numbers and really see the full impact of that until June.
I'm hoping that the impact isn't as big as it could be, because for one thing, we have a food tax, fortunately, because I know myself, people were buying a lot more food because there was really nothing else to do. Everybody was at home, the restaurants were closed, so the grocery stores were very busy, Costco was busy, Sam's Club, places like that were very busy. So hopefully it's maybe not as bad as we think, but I'm looking forward to having that number when it's available.
Mr. Phelps, I'd like to ask a question. We discussed several months ago with all the parks that we have, and you pointed out we have a lot of parks, that we do have some that a lot of people don't even know that we have. They're identified, but they're not really utilized. And we talked the possibility, if we have a couple in close proximity, maybe possibly selling one of them, putting assets from that or the monies from that into the other one, which could help us out quite a bit. Has there been any movement on that? Has there been any planning or thought put into that since then?
Mayor, members of the council, I think we can certainly put that on the, maybe as part of the master plan approach. That is a significant public policy that is really would need to be driven by, obviously, by the mayor and council on that. But I mean, I think that goes back to a fundamental question that we always ask, I think, is both in our individual lives and we do it in our professional lives, is, it's kind of that quantity versus quality. And very rarely can you have both. And so, it may be that as a value statement of the council is they want to have an assessment done of the 90 parks, and maybe there are some examples to where you could shrink that down. But just from my experience, and it may be different here in our community here, that's a real challenge to tell a community that has grown up and built their home and bought a home because of that, that pocket park or that neighborhood park that's in the area, that we're going to close it down. But I mean, it is the dilemma that we have, is that we want to have quality in our parks, but we do have, when you compare us to other cities, and the other cities like Scottsdale and Gilbert, Chandler, that have less parks than we do and less acreage, they also, have larger revenues coming in. And so the number that Scottsdale spends per acre, for example, is off the charts. We'll show this information to you in June. So it's not a surprise when you go to Scottsdale that you see a real high level of quality in their facilities, but they have far less acres. And this is kind of backing out our Thunderbird Park and backing out their preserve that they have. If you just look at the actual parks, they have far less acres per citizen in Scottsdale than we do. So I think it's a policy question, and it just should be something that we'll be glad to engage with you, Mayor, and the other people on it. And if that's so the desire to maybe look and come back with recommendations, we'd certainly be glad to do so.
Okay, and I want to clarify so I'm not misquoted or I have something appear later that I'm looking to sell parks. I'm not looking to sell parks, but we did identify a few places where they're very, very close proximity, very, very small areas that we identify as a park, but really aren't utilized. They're not utilized at all. They're not really maintained or taken care of. And I think there was 2 or 3 in your district, Jamie, that I believe that we could probably do a whole lot better job, give a much better quality, and maybe a bigger benefit for our citizens. So again, I don't want to be misquoted that I'm advocating to sell, but we'd certainly like better quality of what we have and a mechanism to be able to take care of them once we do have them.
Thank you, Mayor. Topic, I would, after listening to everything, I think we have a kind of a plan in place. We're going to go out and evaluate the situation at Swar Ranch. And then I would say that comes back to council as soon as we get that. And if we need to use contingency because it's a safety issue, then we move forward and make a decision what we want to do. But I think that's what we ought to do on this issue is complete the evaluation and then back to council. And if we need to use contingency, then I would be in favor of fixing an emergency situation. If it's a safety issue or other reasons, it is recommended we do that process, and I'd say we do it. And I think that would answer, that concern that Councilmember Turner brought up. As far as, the other discussions we've had about the parks, it's been made clear to me that park maintenance and upgrade has been a priority of our city manager. And in the conversations I've had, we're working towards finding the funding to make that happen. It's similar to what we went through with streets. Streets didn't get to the level we wanted them to get to yet, but we put a plan into place to find the money to do that. And then within 2 years, we're going to be 2 years behind where we hope to be, but we'll have that plan completed. That's what we need to do the parks. I mean, we have to take a thoughtful, methodical approach to finding the resources to fix our parks. And I would just have us look at the possibility. I know there's going to be some bonding in the park program once we see our master plan, how we want to move forward. And perhaps we can step that up a little bit, maybe do the bonding a little earlier than we'd first anticipated, so that we can jump on these capital projects even in the current fiscal year coming up. That's possible. I don't know if that is or not, but that's an idea to find some funding that we're going to bond anyway for. Perhaps we just bond a little earlier for our parks, because we do have some major needs in all of our parks. It's not just Saguaro Ranch, but all of our parks need maintenance and upgrade. And I believe the quicker we can find the resources to do that, and I know our economic development process is helping us find resources to do that through economic development. And I really appreciate what our city manager has been doing in that arena, because that is going to provide long-term and even short-term funding to take care of some of these problems. So I believe we just need to move forward knowing that we're going to take care of Saguaro Ranch as quickly as it's needed. If it's an emergency and we need to go out and fix it because it's a safety hazard, which it may very well be, we're going to have to do some contingency and just take care of it. And we need to it needs to come back to this council, and we need to say, let's do it, and we pull it out of contingency and we do it. And that would be my recommendation. And then I have some other things, but it's on another topic, so I'll wait till we finish this topic.
All right, we'll go to Mr. Hugh next, and then Ms. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We talked about our contingency funds, and when our city manager got here, that's one of the things we started working on. And it had a great benefit for us because our bond ratings were pretty low, and we have been able to increase our bond ratings, and that's one of the main ways our bond rating improved, is that they saw we were fiscally conservative and doing the right things. Any idea just about refinancing our bonds that we had when we got a much better bond rating, how many millions we saved?
Mayor, members of the council, overall, including the water and sewer utility, we've saved approximately $75 million by refinancing debt.
So that's my point. We have done a lot of smart things as working with our employees even to save that $75 million. And now we're fortunate because we have some money in reserves that we can step in and start repairing things. And things are looking great in Glendale. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, thank you. I appreciate your effort to look at innovative ways to solve some of the funding issues on our parks, but I consider the consolidation of parks and perhaps removing some that are duplicative, almost a third rail of politics. There is no way that I would support any kind of discussion of that issue. It will set community upon community if the suggestion is even made to remove a small pocket park from an area. So I personally do not want to go down that road. I think that one issue that we all kind of skirt around that we have to keep in mind is this. Our city, through decisions made previously, part of which I was part of them, some of them I was reluctantly not part of. But the point is that we are encumbered with something that no other city has, and that's $35 million worth of debt that has to be paid every year. Our problem is debt capacity. And where do we find additional debt capacity to do the bonding that we need to do for all of these issues that have been deferred for so long? I think Mr. Phelps's approach is a positive step in that direction. The more economic development we can encourage throughout the city, no matter where it is, that generates revenue of any sort is what's going to dig us out of the hole of a $35 million annual bill to pay off the existing debt that we have. So I would encourage all of council that unless there is something that is atrociously wrong with development projects as they come forward, if you can look at how they will benefit the city financially, we need to take strong looks at that aspect of development projects as they come forward. Do they benefit the city financially? Because every new development project that is accepted helps us to find the money to pay for park maintenance, to pay for street maintenance, to do all the wish lists that we have all accumulated and that we know that the city needs desperately to attend to. Thank you, Mayor.
We have a consensus, CIP.
Mayor, I had one more item that I wanted to bring up. Under the solid waste, and I've had some communications with Ms. Watenko on this. One of the biggest concerns that my citizens bring to me on a regular basis is street sweeping. We have, we cut back on our street sweeping, and now we're back up to, I think, every other month, or maybe a little more often than that. But we're not back to doing our street sweeping every month after bulk trash pickup. And in the CIP, we had a carryover for replacing street sweepers of $267,000, but no allocation until 2024, which wouldn't get us up to where we need to be if we're planning to get to a, street sweeping after every bulk trash pickup. And it is a big issue, I think, for the citizens. The streets, as you know, we have one of the best bulk pickup trash system in the entire county, I believe. And as a result of that, because we have that every month, the streets get littered, and then you always leave a little bit of debris behind, and it does deteriorate the looks of our neighborhood. And I think it's a priority that we should consider by this council as to making that happen, to get back to the monthly sweeping after bulk trash. And I'd like maybe Ms. Waitenko can come up and kind of explain what's going on with that and tell us where we're at with getting our street sweeping completed on a monthly basis.
Mayor, council members, Vice Mayor Malnar, last year through the budget process, the solid waste division increased sweeping from doing it quarterly or 4 times a year on residential streets to doing it every other month. As you stated, it's what our residents are asking for. But to quote somebody else who already said this morning, they're asking city staff to underpromise and overdeliver. Our staff had looked at, could we increase it to monthly this upcoming budget year? And we did not put that forward as a supplemental because currently we're unable to buy street sweepers. So if I had proposed it in the budget and council approved it, we wouldn't be able to implement it. And that's the last thing I think we want to do is tell our residents we can do this when we actually can't. So we are closely watching what it would take to get an additional street sweeper in. We've been very successful in getting them grant funded in the past, but because of the way they've changed the grant funding, you've noticed we do have a carryover. We weren't able to get the one that we had planned current budget year. We deferred that into next year through carryover. We're still looking at getting that additional street sweeper. When we get that one, we'll have a better idea when we can then implement and go to a monthly street sweeping schedule. And so I would suggest that we look at that as a next year supplemental where we add the O&M costs as well as the equipment costs into the budget, and if we can at that time deliver on that request. But at the current time we could not do it, so we did not put it forward.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Again, I appreciate that. I would definitely like us to put it back into the budget as a supplemental as soon as we feel that we can accomplish that.
Mr. Turner?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Matenko, and before you get too far from the mic, while we're on this subject, and I'm glad that Councilmember Mauner brought it up, it's one that I hear fairly often from my constituents and on a monthly basis from one of them, and I don't disagree with him. Could you describe our street sweeping program a little bit better? How many sweepers we have? Are they out every day? And if we were to do it more frequently, we would not only need an additional, at least one or more pieces of equipment, but we would also need additional employees. It would be my question. Can you give us and our residents a little bit of a primer on that?
Mayor and council members, Councilmember Turner, I'm not sure I can answer all those questions off the top of my head. I can tell you we currently sweep all our arterials, so the main streets, 59th Avenue, 67th Avenue, Bell, those are done monthly. Our residential, we increased the frequency last July from going quarterly to every other month. I'm not exactly sure the number of sweepers off the top of my head, nor the employees, but you are correct. It would not be just a equipment purchase, it would also be employees. And I don't have that model with me to tell how many employees we'd be looking at, if it's one or multiple, or the number of sweepers, but we could get back to you with that information.
Mayor, Ms. Watenko, thanks. Yeah, if a short little memo describing that program would be helpful to me, and maybe other council members would appreciate it. But is it fair to say that the sweepers that we do have are deployed on a daily basis throughout the month?
Mayor and council members, Councilmember Turner, yes, we work Monday through Friday street sweeping. You'll typically not see the arterial sweeper during the street. He does work a night shift when there's less traffic out, but we do the residential streets during the day. So the equipment is out every day and the employees are out every day.
Thank you.
Okay. Consensus on the CIP? We do have a consensus.
Yes.
What else do you have?
We have one more slide. Go ahead.
Yep, I was going to say, Mayor, members of the council, that brings us to the second to the last slide of the presentation with the consensus on the operating budget and the capital improvement program. The total budget appropriation for fiscal year 2021 is $747 million. The operating budget is $444 million. CIP, $175 million. Debt is $87 million, and contingency of $41 million. And the last slide is an update to the budget calendar. It just lets you know that the next time you will be seeing the budget is on May 26th, a week from today, for tentative budget adoption. And that concludes our presentation.
All right, well, thank you so much. We do have, or I shouldn't say we, I understand that lunch is being provided next door for anybody that chooses to stay. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.